25th, 6:30. Can we get a call to order? I'm sorry, can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Clark?
Here.
Dearness?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Wait?
Here.
Mayor Toussaint?
Here. Karen, do you mind leading us in the pledge?
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, to start the night off, we have a few presentations. Let's see. First of all, we have. Sorry, what?
Closed session announcement.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. First of all, I think Dave needs to do a readout of the closed session announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8, the City Council met in closed session to consider real property negotiations regarding property on LSL 579. There was no reportable action.
Okay, thank you, Dave. All right, so with that, we have two proclamations tonight. We have proclamation for child abuse prevention and awareness, and then we also have proclamation for April 2019 Donate Life Month. And neither of those people are here, so we're going to skip past those, and then we're going to move into a presentation by the Niels Brock's students. So if you guys want to come up to the podium and...
Do we have to speak in this? Oh, where's the presentation? Ja, han har den.
Skal vi snakke derinde?
Yeah. Yeah, I will click on it. Okay, so we're the Niels Brock students that have made this presentation. I'm Matt.
I'm Sebastian.
I'm Smilla.
I'm Luna, and I'm Julie.
And as Matt said, we're the Niels Brock students who are here. Now, what is Niels Brock? It is a school, or actually it's several schools from Copenhagen, and that's where we're from. In total, we're 28 students who currently live in Solvang, and will be here until the end of May. And you can see some of the students standing here in the room with you. And why are we here? Well, we're here to get like the real world experience and like to get more known about cultural differences, especially from the American culture to Danish culture, and also give some insights in how it is to be Danish. And I think we would also like to help with is making Solvang more Danish. And that's
So this is our focus. First, we want to talk about some of the projects we have been working on in our school over here in America. And the second is events for each month throughout the year, because we have been thinking about some events each month you can do to attract more tourists. And the last one is liberating smart city in Solvang. So the first project, that is decoration, because we think that this Solvang is a very beautiful city, but it's quite boring to look at when you're a tourist. There's no colors. Like in Denmark, we have this place you can see on the right. There's Nyhavn. There's a lot of colors on the buildings. But if you see the Solvang, it's all white. So we want to maybe put on some new decorations so it looks more like Denmark, because Solvang is a Danish city. So that's one of the things we want to put up some decorations. Also, when there's St. Patrick's Day, why is there no green decorations? Etc. etc. And then we have projects 2 and 3. That's about tourism in Solvang and how to service the tourists in Solvang. How can we attract more tourists to Solvang? How can you make them buy more? Because right now there's coming 1.5 million tourists each year to Solvang, and they spend around $30 each tourist. But why don't they spend $100 each tourist? So that's what we want to try to see. How can we make them spend more money in Solvang? And the fourth project is interviewing business owners. There's a group that wants to interview some of the business owners over here to see what they want, how they can improve Solvang, what they want to do, and what they can make, how to do this, make Solvang better in order to make the tourists more happy, and just some of those stuff, and just question them about some questions they have. They made a question now. And then we have the infrastructure, because the transit over here is kind of bad, because when we have to go to one place to another, but we can't drive. And some of the students here can drive, but we're not allowed to drive over here. So it's kind of bad for us, because we have to call a host mom, a hostess, or whatever, a Uber, in order to get to one place to another. So they want to make the infrastructure better, so the young people can take the bus. Because there's not that much things to do in Solvang for young people. We all have to go to Santa Maria or Santa Barbara in order to do some stuff for us teenagers. And you can still tell that by the teenagers already living here. They may be quite boring, and they have to drive all the time.
We'd also try with the infrastructure to promote a bit more of like riding a bike. Yes. Especially that, because that's also something that's very connected to Denmark. Especially if you go to Copenhagen, you'll see a lot of bikes.
And these are the projects two of the girls want to talk more about.
Yeah, we did this project in school, Luna and I, where we kind of want to promote Solvang through the social media.
Yeah, and we want to promote social through the social media, because the social media have a very big influence on young people's life in Denmark, but also generally in the whole world. And many people are also affected by the influencers. If you not know what influencer is, it's people, for example, on Instagram with many followers, so they can speak out to a large target group. And therefore, we can promote Solvang and gain a better reputation or brand our image through these influencers. And we also wanted to learn the different cafes here, although there are not that many. But we want to learn them how to promote their cafes with cute pictures online, because many people find these pictures and then go to a cafe because they saw that the best friends were there, or another candies went to that same restaurant.
Yes, and we've also been asked to come up with a few ideas for some events that Solvang could do for each month of the year. So we just have a few suggestions, like St. Patrick's Day in March, and it calls for like a bigger Fest and Out celebration in February. Or Easter, and trying to like get some of the Danish way to celebrate Easter in it, like having a lot of Danes like to eat smørbrød during Easter, which is like a really good Danish dish. Or yeah, like Easter egg hunt is also just in the city. And then we thought maybe like that's not so Danish, but celebrating some of the Native Americans. Or they could also celebrate the day that Denmark was freed from the occupation of the Germans back in the Second World War, because that's what we do at home. And in June we have like a really big Danish holiday called Sankt Hans, where we like burn a witch on a bonfire. It's not a real witch anymore, but yeah. And they could also like have a really good Danish summer desserts, which is also like really good, and I think Americans would like them too. So that could be an option. And in September you of course have your Danish Day, which we think is a really good idea. And that's kind of like the whole inspiration like guide for the events we think could be fun to do. And in October, this is not so Danish, it's more German, but like celebrating like the Northern European too, but having an Oktoberfest. Or of course in December having Christmas party with more like Danish traditions, like they could have risengrød, which is like a Danish rice porridge, or risalamande, which is the rice porridge where you put like almonds and whipped cream in it, and they have like a contest on who finds a whole almond in there, and you could do that for kids, and they could win like a free burger or something like that.
Yeah, so liberating smart city. So in Denmark right now, and in other cities around the world, they want to make the cities more modern, to make them better. They have all of these cities that's doing smart cities have a plan for 2025 and 2030 to reduce pollution, to make the city more modern, and how to make this infrastructure better, and just to make the city in total just better and sustainable, reduce pollution. And that's what Solvang also want to do, and that's what we're here to help for, to make the city more smart, just to make the city more better, to make it more like modern, like around the world. Yeah, and that's what in this project students are going to do for now. This exchange student group and the for next year and etc. etc. to make the city more better. So we can help the city council to make the city better, to make the business better, and just totally to make Solvang better and more modern, to attract more tourists and to get more money. So if you have any questions or any thoughts on this, just please say it, and we would glad to hear it.
Olivia and Solvang, I'm also Danish, and I have been from day one, and the city council, do you know, I've been up there speaking 5 times about bike lanes, and I go again and again and again and again. I am very much on your side. I do feel like we need to make this Danish, we need to spruce it up, and there's many things we can do, so I would love for you to get my contact. I would love to help you out and take part in whatever I can help you with.
Thank you.
I presume at the end of this process, you will document your findings and your suggestions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Will that document be available to all of us?
Yeah, we would give it to Chris, Mr. Chris, and he would give it to you. I think. We would just give it all our results to Mr. Chris.
Well, in general here at FEST, we're mainly talking about a lot of research and surveys.
And we got to collect.
And that's kind of, the point is to give it to all of you so you know how to like improve
And how to use it.
considering different situations for the different shoppers.
All right, so with that, I hate to interrupt, but we are running a little bit out of time, and I don't want this to turn into a public forum. But anyway, pleasure having you guys here. I'd just like to say I just can't believe the level of presentation you guys came up with. I think I met with you guys briefly on Saturday or Sunday. We're basically 36 hours later, and look at the level of quality and the presentation here and enthusiasm. So love all the energy there and everything. If any other council member wants to say anything at this point, then feel free. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
I'm sorry, I just want to say thank you, and for those in the audience that probably were taken by surprise by this presentation. This is something that we've been working on for about 2 months. Ryan had met with the chancellor of the Niels Brock School, and it was through those conversations that we zeroed in on something that would help build the connections between Solvang and our parent, Denmark. So hopefully in the months and years to come, the Niels Brock students, not just this group, but also future groups, will contribute substantially to the development of our community. Thank you again.
All right. And I'd also like to point out, because I did notice that Jim Richardson is here, and I thank him very much for taking the opportunity to introduce us to that Sister City program and allowing this to happen here. So thank you, Jim. All right, with that, we'll move on to public communications, written or verbal. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
At this time, please direct comments to the City Council regarding consent calendar items or matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Council. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes.
Okay. And actually, with the amount of people we have here and speaker slips I have tonight, with consensus of the Council, I'd like to limit public speaker time to 1 minute, if that's okay. No? I'm sorry, what's the consensus?
3 minutes, unless it's just agreeing with the other person, and then put that at
1 minute?
1 minute.
1 minute? Okay. All right, so move on with 1 minute. Oh, and I'll just, yeah, so 1 minute, but the main thing is if you're just repeating what someone else said, if you could just simply state that you agreed with the prior person, that would be great. All right, so with that, the first speaker we have is Lee Rosenberg.
Thank you, and if I had some helium, I would really speed it up. I want to address the last week's meeting, Chinese fire drill as it were, where the mayor failed to appear, respond, nor respond specifically to the city manager. Councilperson Waite was not informed that the meeting was going to take place. I don't know whether Robert Clark was in the same position, although he looked somewhat like a deer in a headlight at that point. I question why the city attorney or the auditor should be replaced. You have tremendous institutional knowledge, and if there is any ongoing reason why these people should be dismissed, it would be interesting for the public to know about it, because it's going to impact the public substantially. There is not a great deal of experience in the governance of the city or any municipality.
Thank you, Lee.
On the council, and I think it would be good for you guys to respond to that question. Thank you for the one.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, I'm sorry. Please do not. Ed Skit.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I'm Ed Skit, citizen of Solvang. I am also going to speak in regards to last Wednesday's meeting. I will say I was very disappointed that the first thing out of your mouth this evening was not an apology to city staff, city council members, the mayor, and the public, and anybody else involved. It was your meeting that you called for, and you did not take care of it, or you did not control what you was going to be said. You should have been here. You need to apologize to everybody in regards to that. And I would say you should probably also pay the city back for the amount of money that was dispersed in that meeting. So that's on that comment. Last comment was 1 minute on this speaking is absolutely, excuse my term, asinine. As long as I was on the city council, we never cut the timeline to 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Renfro.
Good evening, Council. Steve Renfro, owner of Solvang Brewing Company. I'm here tonight to kind of bring up some concerns I have with the way that codes are being enforced through the city and its subjective interpretation. I recently, as well as several other businesses, received citations referring to Code Section 1117-1. I made this aware to some council members as well as the city manager. Basically, and I don't know how long this has been going on, but I've been doing business here for almost 10 years, and I've been cited on multiple occasions under this code section to find out that there's really no code section that's being enforced under the municipal code. It's a BAR guideline. And as far as I'm aware, the BAR is an advisory board. So I think it would be really advantageous to the business owners to feel the support of the city, and to know that we're listened to and appreciated.
Thank you, Steve. Rod Simmons.
You know what? It's a waste of time to get up here.
I want you to say who the next person is after the person who's going to speak, so that they.
Oh, okay. I can do that. Yeah.
It's the way I don't know the direction the whole council's taking. You watch, you go into the building department, and everybody's got, the attitude is poor. Nobody knows what you guys are doing. You're talking about bringing ID1 in. You're talking about taking the sewer district and taking it over and sending it to San Ynez. This is Hooterville. Everything that's said here is heard. So this, you guys, somehow you got to pull us all together instead of tearing us apart. And it's to give somebody a minute to address this is bullshit.
Okay. So we have Cowboy Bob and Matt Thomas.
Good evening.
And up next, we have Tracy Farhad.
Opportunity to thank the City Council for giving us an opportunity to talk a little bit about our adventure here for the city of Solvang. I'm Cowboy Bob. This is my partner, Matt Thomas. And I do believe you all have a proposal of mine sitting in front of you somewhere, I hope, that you could kind of glance at.
Oh, so that's in council correspondence later on in the meeting. So we don't have that right in front of us right now, but.
Well, our main purpose here tonight is to ask permission to get into your next agenda for our proposal to the city of Solvang for Cowboy Bob's Western Tourist Attraction.
Okay. So it's like a special event?
No, full-time.
Okay.
7 days a week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Nope.
That was short and sweet.
Next time. Next time, we get them.
Tracy Farhad.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Tracy Farhad, Executive Director of the Solvang Conference and Visitors Bureau, and your tourism report tonight about the Taste of Solvang. So it was the 27th annual Taste of Solvang a week plus ago, 6 events. I want to thank all the businesses who participated because it takes all the businesses to make this happen. We had over 1,400 tickets sold, 10 states represented. I want to thank especially our 2 major sponsors, the Shumash Casino Resort and Visit the San Ynez Valley, as well as Cultivate Events, who produced it. We have 50% spend the night in Solvang, with 41% spending 2 nights. Average age has gotten younger and is 25 to 45. We also wanted to tell you that out of the wine, beer, shop, dine, it was 77% that participated in shopped and bought, and another 27% that attended a museum. 40% spent over $500. That was the largest amount. 64% have visited 4 times plus, and another 67%, this was their very first Taste of Solvang. So we want to thank everybody who participated and made it happen.
Thank you, Tracy. Tracy Beard. No one.
I am proud to announce to the parents and citizens of Solvang that the Solvang Chamber is going to partner with Econ Alliance for a STEM program at the San Ynez Valley High School on July 26th. We have Space VR, which will be an open house ribbon cutting this Wednesday evening on Alisal. We are winding down on our women business. We have honored over 50 business women, and we have our commercials been seen by 10 million viewers. We just finished our commercial on Friday for our film, for our wine tasting, 6 of our tasting rooms. Our awards dinner is April 18th. We have now scheduled 18 Music in the Parks event from 12 last year. Thank you. And we asked permission to put a live tree for a holiday account on the agenda, which I did not see tonight. And we had met with Rick. So that's a little bit of what the Chamber's doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I would just like to address that, Lee, I do apologize for missing that meeting last week. I don't know if you noticed, but there have been some meetings I have not been able to chair. I've been very sick, and I'm trying to get through that. I'm on a lot of antibiotics. My tracking is not the best. So again, I do apologize. There was a little bit of a scheduling, mishap. I believe the meeting was set for 6 p.m. and I thought I was running early to the meeting when I was leaving at 6:45. That could be between my tracking and whatever's going on, but I do apologize for that.
Why wasn't Councilperson Waite informed that the meeting was taking place in the first place?
The meeting was properly noticed, 24-hour notice for a special meeting. With that, I have to move on. Let's see, City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the City Council, your next City Council meeting is 2 weeks from this evening. It will be April the 8th. We're trying to keep that one a little bit light because that will be the first meeting of our new City Manager, David Gassaway. We have a couple of consent agenda items. We have the annual housing element. I know Council talked about the housing element a couple weeks ago. We're going to be bringing that forward for your consideration. Also, the Economic Development Ad Hoc Committee is an item that is to be considered, and then a notice of completion on our 2nd Street drainage project. So those are the couple items that we have going forward for the 8th. Mr. Renfro did talk on the public comment session about the code compliance issues. He had talked to me about that, and I am going to be working with city staff on that section of the municipal code to find out why the violations are being crafted the way they are. So staff is following up on that one. And then the item the Cowboy Bob talked about is in your agenda packet. It's in the back under correspondence of council members. So that would be something if council wants to deem to be brought up at a future city council meeting, you would be able to talk about that at the next, later on this evening when that time comes. And that concludes my report.
All right. With that, Lisa, would you please read the title for consent calendar?
The consent agenda is designed for routine administrative city matters and is approved by roll call vote with one motion. These items are discussed only on request by council members. Members of the public were afforded an opportunity to speak on consent agenda items during the public communications portion of the agenda.
All right. Would any council members like to poll any items on the consent agenda? No. Okay.
The only thing I noticed was on the minutes, there was a vote that said 5-0, and I believe it should have said 4 with Ryan being absent.
Correct. I was notified of that.
Okay.
I'll make that change.
Okay. So with that, and then I need to abstain from item number C. So when we vote tonight, I will not be voting along with item C. Other than that, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as is.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. We get a roll call.
Councilmember Waite?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Dearness?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Toussaint?
Yes, with the abstention from the item C. All right, with that, we'll move on to the regular agenda. Lisa, can I get a title read out for item number 4?
Item 4, Solvang Mesa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District, number 2004-1, resolution confirming and levying assessments.
Can we get a staff report?
Yes, good evening, Mayor Toussaint and council members. Matt Vanderlinden, your Public Works Director and City Engineer. And this first item, as stated by the City Clerk, is the Solvang Mesa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District. And in an effort to summarize the staff report, which is somewhat lengthy, I've put together a little presentation here. So I'll go through this. And so the matter before you is regarding a resolution confirming the assessment for the maintenance district. So by way of brief history, the landscape maintenance or assessment district concept was originally proposed by the original Skip Mesa developer, and the Planning Commission approved this concept in the conditions of approval, including the assessment district, or what's formerly called the Solvang Mesa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District, LLMD. And then in May of 2003, the Solvang City Council at that time excuse me, approved the conditions of approval, therefore setting the foundation for what was to come after that. And then after the phase 1, the project was constructed in 4 phases, and after the phase 1 improvements were completed, the Public Works Department and Parks Department staff were directed to administer the LLMD beginning in fiscal year 2007-08. So this map, it just illustrates all the facilities that are part of the assessment district or the maintenance district. So you'll see there's just a little green line representing all the different parkways around each block. So those parkways are part of the assessment district or maintenance district. At the end of most blocks, there's a side yard landscaping that's outside the property owner's fence, and so that's what this crosshatch area is. So for most of the corner lots, there's a side yard area here that's part of the the assessment district that's maintained by the maintenance district. We also once a year do fire abatement. We do weed whacking along this green shaded area and along these areas here. And then there are also private and public open space areas along Parkview Trail and Valley Oak Road, and then here on the back of these lots that back up to Chalk Hill Road. In addition to that, the city allowed the developer to put a detention basin within Hans Christian Andersen Park, and but with the requirement that the maintenance district funds have to go towards maintaining that detention basin. So every year we clear vegetation out of that detention basin and do weed whacking and maintenance, vegetation clearing along the access roads to that. In addition, a couple things that are included, in addition to the landscaping, the maintenance district is responsible for paying for the power for the street lights in Skip Mesa, and for power for operating the irrigation system. And of course, along with all the landscaping is the irrigation system itself. And then every year there's a number of repairs and things that have to be done and administrative costs. But anyway, so this map basically just shows the extent of all the landscaping and general maintenance that's part of the district. So the assessment process follows these steps, and each year the staff review the various costs that were incurred. We look over the budget and establish a new budget for each new coming year, fiscal year. There's an adoption of an initiation resolution, which was done a month ago by the City Council, and that resolution initiates the preliminary engineer's assessment report. It also approves that report and sets the date for the follow-up meeting, which is this public hearing. Then the next step is to hold the public hearing, which the City Council will do at the conclusion of my presentation, and then adopt the assessment resolution setting the assessment on the property tax bills. And then the assessment engineer coordinates with the county tax assessor's office, and the assessments are set on the property tax rolls, and then as the funds are collected by the county, they're transferred to the city. So for fiscal year 1920, fiscal year 1920's assessment, as mentioned, there was the initiation resolution, which was adopted on February 25th. And all 4 phases of Skip Mesa, so there's 169 lots. They benefit equally from the LLMD improvements. And the previous cost-saving measures that staff has taken, we basically, there were 2 existing irrigation meters in phase 1. They were 2-inch meters, and we determined those could be downsized to 1-inch. So that was significant cost savings. Because basically it was from that point on they had a reduced meter charges. And then also when phases 3 and 4 were being developed, we were able to work with the developer and their landscape architect, and the landscaping was changed to go from, because of the drought, the landscaping in the parkways was changed from grass to drought-tolerant plants utilizing a drip system, and that allowed us to eliminate a few meters that otherwise would have been required, and so that reduced their costs as well. And then the landscape maintenance contract was rebid in this fiscal year, earlier this year, and the new contract was awarded in January of this year. And then, but then there are also some recent cost increases. So we had received quite a few complaints, primarily about weeds, and so the new contract the scope of services and the standards of care were revised, and the contractor Brightview to provide that extra manpower and primarily for extra weeding. Their proposal included a three-person crew rather than a two-person crew, and they come 3 days a week. And then also the California minimum wage recently increased, and over the next several years it's scheduled to be increased a few more times, and so that impacted the costs. And then our contractor, who is Brightview, they're the new contractor, and they were the previous contractor. They explained that for the last couple of years, they had in the old contract they had underestimated the cost to do the weeding, and they were actually losing quite a bit of money the last 2 years. And so, as mentioned, we put the contract out to bid, and Brightview's bid with the new standards of care, new scope of services, they were the lowest cost and most qualified vendor. The other proposals we received were quite a bit higher, significantly higher. Anyway, so based on the budget estimates, the recommended and the assessment engineer's report, the recommended assessment is for next fiscal year is $1,224 per parcel. And with that concludes my presentation, and staff requests that the City Council open the public hearing and then close the public hearing, discuss the matter, provide staff with direction, and we recommend that the City Council adopts the assessment resolution. So with that, I'm available for any questions you might have.
Are there any questions of staff from council?
I just have one.
Okay.
What was the assessment last year, Matt?
Last year, the assessment was $1,140
Thank you.
per parcel. Yeah, so the assessment had been $1,200 per parcel for about 5 years. The reserve had been built up, and so to an adequate level, there was no need to build it any further. So the assessment was able to drop, unfortunately, just for 1 year, but it did drop from $1,200 down to $1,140, and but now it's recommended to be increased back to the $1,224.
And second question, do you have a percentage-wise what the next closest bidder was to Brightview? Were they 20% higher, 30% higher?
Well, the third bidder was like almost double, and the second bidder was, yeah, it was probably like 50% higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm done.
I got a question, Ryan. So I was wondering if there's any way to split the costs, like if, say, you pulled out the landscaping portion and just left the lighting district, so that the city was just in charge of the lighting and the drainage and whatnot, and then pulled out the landscaping. Is there any way to see what the separation in costs would be, as far as the assessments for the homeowners and whatnot?
Sure. You
may not have it right there. I'm just saying.
No, we've looked at various possibilities, and if the landscape maintenance and the repairs and maintenance item, which is also implemented by the landscape maintenance contractor, if those two items were eliminated, the assessment would drop from $1,224 per parcel down to approximately $595 per parcel.
Okay.
Because there's still all the irrigation water, the meter charges, and all that, and then administering the maintenance district, and power for the lighting and a few other minor things.
So the reason I'm saying that is that, well, we can discuss it later. That's fine.
All right. With that, we'll go to public comment. I have one speaker slip from Marlene Hudson.
Good evening, everybody. Do I have 1 minute or do I have more?
That's a good question. Since there's only one speaker on this, we'll do 3 minutes.
Okay, great. All right. Okay. I believe you all know me from an email I sent a few months ago regarding the ongoing landscaping problems on Skid Mesa. I appreciated your immediate responses, and I also appreciated a positive and constructive meeting that Bob, my husband, and I had with Fred Legeman last summer, and I'd like to keep that going. On February 15th of this year, I received an email along with several others from Matt Vanderlinden, thank you, Matt, explaining the rationale for a Skip Mesa assessment. This email was sent to a resident concerning the assessment, and was it the result of work that was done at the north entrance behind 3 properties, which I understand came to about $50,000. You can correct me on this if I'm wrong. I'm here today to address one reason given for the Skip Mesa assessment in that email. Quote, several residents have requested increased service, which can only be provided by adding manpower at significant additional cost. In parentheses, the new contract includes this, unquote. This doesn't seem fair. For almost 5 years, the residents of Skip Mesa have been dealing with bad decisions between the builder, CCB, and the sidewalks. Overgrown rosemary and salvia make it impossible to exit a spring for the problem and reserve, unquote. Are these reserves? On a side note, I suggest giving those pieces of property back to the residents who own them, or we will continue having to pay for the maintenance. Nothing is etched in stone.
All right, we gotta.
Well, okay, I just have like one paragraph. Okay? In summary, not a single resident asked for these problems, and it's a shame that we're still dealing with them after all these years. Skip Mesa residents are not asking for increased services, but that contracts are followed. However, it's not unreasonable to ask that mistakes made by others be corrected. We aren't expecting Beverly Hills. We're expecting decent landscaping as promised upon purchase and maintenance of it. I would be happy, along with other residents, to meet with anyone regarding this problem. I also have a proposal very similar to yours, and I'd be very happy to talk about it sometime.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, with that, we'll take this back for discussion action by the City Council. Who would like to start?
So the proposal that I have is exactly what she's talking about. The issue seems to be the landscaping, so my feeling is that we should figure out a way to take the whole landscaping portion away from the city and give it to the residents. And let them form their own HOA or whatever they want to form, and they can manage it, they can pay the money into it, and they can take complete and utter care of it, and then the city's completely out of that entire set of operations. And we can still maintain the lights and the drainage we can work on as well, but I think that seems to be the main problem with this entire thing.
So like splitting out the services offered and.
Correct, yeah.
I mean, I would certainly love anything like that, because I feel like this whole deal basically makes the city council the de facto. Ever have to agree to doing that if that's so? Yeah.
Well, the way the assessment proceedings work under the 1224 is a number less than is necessary to perform all the actions that are necessary, whether it be the water, electricity, and so on. So you have the power to go on that range anywhere along the way. You also have the power under the Streets and Highways Code to change certain things that are in the engineer's report, so you do have the power to split off the landscaping. There may be need to go back to the Planning Commission to alter that that condition of approval for the entire project if there is some agreement between the city and the property owners to take over the landscaping portion of it. But the short answer after all that legalese is you do have the power to do it. It's just a question of the details of how you get there.
Okay. Robert?
Getting back to that, Dave, all the residents of Skip Mesa have to be on the same page as far as making this go through, or
well,
in their HOA, or?
Short answer, no. They don't all have to be on the same page, but if you set up a system where the assessments came out at a particular number that was objectionable to a majority of the residents, then you wouldn't be able to impose that assessment. So if, for example, you were to go and increase the assessment to cover some of the maintenance that is not being done by the landscapers, in other words, the infrastructure maintenance, lighting and so on, they could protest against that assessment. But it's not necessary for the entirety of the homeowners on that to agree to the assessment for it to go into place.
Well, logistics aside, I like Daniel's idea.
Karen?
I'm in favor of Daniel's idea also to
add in that we as the city would be maintaining the areas that we have designated remain open space? So we would still be maintaining that.
I'd
no,
rather
I
not.
think- I
I'd rather
think
turn
all
it
the
all
landscape-
over.
Well, see,
I'm
but
talking all of it.
But
I think
then who would maintain?
Well, that's what an HOA would do. Just like, there's certain HOAs like Village Collection has a common area, then they maintain that as well.
Right.
That's the idea.
Correct.
Is it actually a common area? Do the residents actually own that open area, or is that
Well,
owned by the city?
Let me just show you here on this map. It's kind of odd, and of course, none of the current staff came up with this, but you'll notice this lot right here, it's this big long shape, and the house is right here, but all this open area here that's maintained by the LMD is on this person's lot. It's part of their lot. The same thing with this lot. The house is right here, but this is all part of their lot. But, well, in this case, this area is kind of over the top of the slope down into the park, and it's just all natural. But this area here is maintained by the LMD. It's part of this lot right here. I think that's lot 159. But anyway, so this L-shaped lot. And so these lots, the houses are here, but it has this big area here. And in the final maps that were recorded, some areas like here and along the entrances, those were designated as common open space areas. And these areas here were designated as private open space areas. And as Ms. Hutchinson was mentioning, it actually was about $45,000 in order to reduce the maintenance costs for these areas. We implemented rockscape and other drought-tolerant landscaping, added some trees and a few bushes. But so we're taking steps similar to what she had suggested to reduce costs. But anyway, so yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You answered my question. I just wanted to make sure that if it is indeed land that belongs to the city, that we would maintain it. If it's actually, as you're just showing me now, actually belongs to the private residents, then we wouldn't be spending city money to maintain private resident landscaping.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm sorry, you triggered my memory. So we could go back to the planning commission and I guess back to the city council through a process. If there was an interest to eliminate this open space in these areas and give them back to the property owner, but I think there's a whole planning process that would have to happen for that. But other than that, if the residents were responsible and you had something like a homeowners association, they could maintain all those quote-unquote common areas, private and public open space areas.
Just to clarify with regard to the if that property were to be turned back over to the owners there, was that some form of a open space easement, or I'm just trying to go back to like when they bought the home and the disclosures and things like that.
Well, we'd have to research that. That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I'm not certain how it was, if it was listed as an easement, but I don't know if Lisa, you remember that? Okay, well, yeah.
My understanding right now is that it's their property, but they can't actually build on it. So I thought there's some form of open space.
Correct.
Easement on it. I just wondering how, because I do see a lot of positive opportunities here for discussions around changing this relationship and stuff. I'm personally love the idea and willing to explore it. I'm just trying to address some of the immediate concerns that I see here.
Yeah. So we could research that.
Okay.
And I might suggest, to try to do these changes in an orderly manner. You might want to consider approving the proposed assessment with direction to staff to pursue converting it or creating some kind of mechanism where the homeowners can be responsible for maintaining all of it, the landscaping anyway.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Because we got to find out if the majority of the residents even would be interested in doing it, you know?
I think all that would take several hearings.
that's gonna
and
take a
things
while.
like that. So obviously they're still going to want their services while that goes on.
Right.
Um,
And just one thing to keep in mind, the irrigation system, it was designed for this common, like a HOA concept. And so there's about 15 to 20 different irrigation stations, and each station, covers like half of a block or whatever. So you'll have one part of the irrigation system that goes in front of like 6, 8, 10 homes. And so there wouldn't be the ability for one individual homeowner to like take care of the whole thing, you know what I mean? Because it's the way it's designed.
all lumped together, yeah.
Yeah, right. So just
Okay. Any other discussion on this? Do we have any?
So by adopting the resolution with the stipulation that going forward, we add staff or
Direct staff.
direct staff to explore, which is actually the citizens' deal, to the POA or an HOA.
Yes, we could adopt resolution 19 next in order, and then direct staff to pursue those kinds of opportunities. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Is that your motion, Robert?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Wade,
Yes.
Dearness.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Mayor Toussaint.
Yes, and that passes 5-0. All right, without move on to item number 5. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
Item 5, resolution adopting the SB1 Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account fiscal year 2019-20 project list.
Okay, can we get a staff report?
Alrighty, so SB1 is Senate Bill 1, and this is covering the road maintenance and rehabilitation account. SB1 created the new gas tax, which I'll go into in just a minute, and this is regarding the fiscal year 1920 project list. So that's the project list for this coming fiscal year. So as mentioned, Senate Bill 1 created the Road Repair and Accountability Act. That became law in 2017, and that created a 12 cents per gallon gasoline excise tax and a 20 cents per gallon diesel excise tax. And the bill funds multiple programs. Some of the big programs are state highway maintenance. So most of the funds go that are generated by this new tax go to state highway maintenance. So that's Caltrans and all the numbered highways in the state. It also goes to expand rail and transit. And they have grant programs it funds grant programs such as the Active Transportation Program, which you're familiar with. And then lastly, there's the Local Streets and Roads Program, which is funded by the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account. The funds are heavily maintenance focused. They're restricted to roadway, drainage, and transportation-related projects, so that could be bicycle and pedestrian projects. The funds are allocated based on population, and the estimated allocation for Solvang for fiscal year 1920 is approximately $95,000. So it's not a huge amount of money, but and that's the annual allocation. It's anticipated that amount might go up slightly over the next few years, but then as more and more vehicles on the road become electric, less and less gas will be purchased, and that amount is expected to kind of taper off in the future. So the projects require that a project list be submitted to CTC, that's the California Transportation Commission. They work in close coordination with Caltrans, but our actual project list actually does go to a state website, and it's the CTC, or the California Transportation Commission staff that we interact with most closely in this process. And then in order to proceed and receive the funds, we have to have a public hearing and a resolution. for the city council to review and adopt the project list. And then we have annual reporting requirements. So we have to have the resolution and submit the project list, and then that is in the spring of every year. And in the fall of every year, we have to report on how we utilize the funds. So our recommendations are to utilize our more flexible Measure A and general fund monies for pavement overlays, sidewalk, bicycle, and drainage projects, and focus on expanding the city's slurry seal program and occasionally doing special projects with this, this road maintenance and rehabilitation account money. And we're recommending that for most projects, since the amount we're getting is only $95,000, we're recommending accumulating that over two or three year period, and then adding it to a pavement maintenance project. And we're recommending at this time to accumulate funds during fiscal year 1920, and then use those funds in combination with the funds we receive in 2021 to help fund the South Alisal Road full depth reclamation or reconstruction project. So FDR, that's the acronym for full depth reclamation. It's a unique process where the existing asphalt pavement on the road, there's a giant milling machine, it passes over it and it grinds up the existing asphalt pavement. It's like a giant rototiller. It grinds up that asphalt, it mixes it with the aggregate base that's under the asphalt paving and a little bit of the soil underneath that. It mixes it all up. They add cement to it, powdered cement. Then they moisten that and they grate it and they roller compact it so it becomes a super dense, strong base course underneath the new road surface. And then once that's given a little bit of time to cure and harden, then you put an asphalt overlay on top of that. So the finished surface looks just like a regular paved roadway, but now it's got this super strong 10 to 12 inch thick material that's a blend of the aggregate base, the asphalt, ground up asphalt, and some soil with the cement in there. So that's a proposed project. That South Alisal Road project is proposed to reconstruct Alisal Road from the San Ynez River Bridge to the southerly city limits. So it's a pretty big project. But South Alisal Road is one of the roads that's in the worst condition right now in the city. It's not the worst, but we have a few alleys and a couple short streets. But this is the main major street that's in bad condition right now. And so the next steps would be conduct the public hearing or open the public hearing and close the hearing and discuss and direct staff regarding the proposed use of the funds and the project list, and then adopt the resolution approving that project list with any revisions you'd like us to make. I believe that, so here's the project list, and sorry for the small print, but it shows the first year here, fiscal year 1920, and just accumulating the funds and then doing the actual project in 2021. And so that is the project list, and that concludes my staff report and available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Matt. Does council have any questions of the staff report?
Not questions.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll open for public comment. I have no speaker slips. We'll take this back to council for discussion and action. Who would like to start?
I'll start. I like the idea of putting that money aside over the next few years to accumulate it and use it for future projects, as opposed to the $95,000 annually to try and spend. That'll get you one sidewalk on one house on Alisal. So I think it would benefit the city to accumulate that over time, and we're going to have some meat to it.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak on this item?
Nope. Can I make a motion?
Do we have a motion?
Yes. I make a motion to adopt resolution number 19. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Solvang adopting the FY 2019-20 list of projects to be funded by the SB1 Road Repair and Accountability Act.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
It's moved and seconded. Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Waite,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Dearness,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Mayor Toussaint.
Yes, passes 5-0. With that, move on to item number 6. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
Item 6, hours of operation for businesses within the city of Solvang.
Thank you, Lisa. Dave, can we get a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Before you tonight is a modified ordinance regarding hours of operation for businesses within the city. As the city council is aware, at various recent meetings, the council considered limiting the hours of operation for various businesses within the city. The matter was sent to the Planning Commission for some recommendations, and those returned to the city council, with the city council adopting the majority of those recommendations. The proposed ordinance that is before you incorporates those changes, and the recommendation is to introduce the ordinance by first reading. If the council adopts it, then the ordinance will return at the next regular meeting, and the ordinance would go into effect 30 days after. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? No? All right, with that, we'll take this to public comment. And I would like to, before, just mention that I have met with the developer, Josh Richmond, in regard to this, and I, pursuant to those conversations, I do think the ordinance as proposed seems like a good compromise. And with that, we'll move on to public comment. Joel Asmussen? Followed by Susan Bott.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. As a resident and a member of the local law enforcement community here in Solvang, I believe that opening a 24-hour store that sells alcohol and prescription drugs is going to attract people from the casino that we do not want in our community. The majority of crimes and arrests that occur within Solvang city limits are patrons coming or going from the casino. Most of us have seen and read the lights and sirens section from the San Ynez Valley News, and I think we can all agree that having a 24-hour business will potentially increase criminal activity in the area. I'm concerned also for my wife, who runs very early in the morning in this area. I've seen firsthand while working, also as a civilian, people breaking traffic laws at this time due to the fact that there's little pedestrian traffic. I'm referring to infractions such as running stop signs and traffic lights. I can only imagine what the traffic increase would be with the 24-hour business at the early hours in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Bott. Followed by Nancy Emerson.
Thanks. Excuse me, Susan Bott. I'm speaking just for myself tonight. The ordinance as specified in tonight's agenda packet appears to be a reasonable solution to me. It seems like the least that the city of Solvang can do for nearby residents who had no idea that they would one day be neighbors to some pretty massive businesses. I hope you will approve this ordinance. Thank you.
Nancy Emerson. Followed by Charles Werner.
Mayor Toussaint and council members, I'm Nancy Emerson, a Solvang resident, but representing We Watch tonight. We are a San Ynez Valley organization working to protect the rural character of our valley. Hours of operation, businesses near residential areas, raises an interesting issue. It seems to us that Solvang was described as a village where the carpets got rolled up at about 5 p.m. not that long ago, and now possible 24-hour businesses have surfaced. We Watch agrees with residents living near commercial zones that they need to be offered some period of peace and quiet, which those of us living elsewhere in the city take for granted. We suspect that many of them are trying to sleep before the midnight hour of the ordinance. A distance of 500 feet from a residential lot line, a bit more than a typical city block, for activating this section seems fair, even business generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Werner, followed by Gabe Rossetti.
Good evening. I'm the president of the Solvang Chamber of Commerce. The only thing I would ask you to do, since you seem dead set on passing this ordinance, is that you go back to the original recommendation, which is midnight, and then in the previous meeting you stopped it at 5 a.m. So I would ask that you do it from midnight to 5 a.m. Thank you.
Gabe Rossetti.
Thank you. I'm Gabe Rossetti. We appreciate this ordinance. We appreciate the fact that you want to keep Solvang unique, and thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll take it back to the council for discussion and action. And just to clarify, Dave, I believe the proposed ordinance as is reads 12 to 5 a.m.
That's correct. The provision under subsection B of the ordinance says that 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. There are provisions, however, that if there is an exemption for alcohol businesses that are regulated by the Department of Alcohol Beverage Control, that they would be preemptive. In other words, we cannot enforce our regulations over that which is approved by the state. So if there are those that are allowed to be open until 2 a.m., those would continue to allow to be open until 2 a.m.
Okay.
So I have a, on 114 of our packages, number 3, it states, if in the discretion of the Planning Commission, the businesses can conduct activity between the hours of 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. To me, that looks reversed. To me, it would be can conduct activity between 5 a.m. and 12 a.m. Because the way this reads to me means that it is 24-hour. You're going from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m.
What that language is intended to do is to provide the Planning Commission opportunity to determine whether a business can conduct businesses within the hours of 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. without adversely affecting the health, safety, and welfare. So in other words, if a business operation came forward and said, we really need to be open till 12:30 and here's why, then the Planning Commission would be able to, after having a public hearing on that, determine whether or not they would grant that exemption. It's not intended to affect businesses that are open between 5 a.m. during the day all the way up until 12 midnight. Those would not be covered by that provision.
Okay, so our Planning Commission had originally suggested the 10 p.m. closure, if I'm correct. They had restricted the 12 a.m. and had moved it to 10 p.m. And then we had suggested adding on an extra hour in the morning to open businesses to open at 5 a.m., if I'm correct.
Well, the recommendation from the Planning Commission was 10 a.m. Or 10 p.m., I'm sorry. The council did not carry that over. The council went from 12 to 5, is my understanding of the council's direction.
Okay, so that's why we're having this this reading of it now. After careful consideration, I took the liberty of looking at various businesses around the valley, and I did find one business that is open until 11 p.m., and that is Albertsons. CVS and Buellton closes at 10, Rite Aid closes at 10. I truly think that we do not have to extend to the 12 a.m. We have services available here within the valley via Albertsons up to 11 p.m. So with that in mind and listening to and receiving much communication from the public located very close to the business area that we are discussing right now, I would like to take the advice of our Planning Commission, the highly qualified people that we appointed to make these kind of decisions for us, and go with the 10 p.m. closure, but extend the morning to 5.
Just to clarify, this is for the city at large. It's not
city
just
at large. That would affect restaurants that don't have a liquor license. They would be required to close at 10 p.m. under that proposal. Any other types of businesses that are not exempted under subsection E of the ordinance, such as hotels, automated teller machines, C3 zoned locations, or public safety. So if there's something that falls into that, I don't know one off the top of my head.
Domino's.
Well, Domino's, that would be.
They're open after 10.
Yeah. So that would be a restriction on those businesses to shut them down at 10 o'clock if they're within that 500-foot radius.
What about a bakery? What about a bakery that opens, say, at 2 in the morning? It's not open to the public, but it's open, and maybe it's taking deliveries.
So with that, there's a lot of exclusions in there. It's not saying that you can't conduct business. It's just saying it's not open to the public. So the bakery, they could work all night, but it's not gonna. They're not open for the public to be coming in there all night.
And we removed the delivery issue from the ordinance as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Is there a delivery restriction as to when they can deliver? So I mean, they could deliver at 3.
We removed that because the Planning Commission had recommended that. The council directed to remove the delivery restriction. So if you take a look in subsection B of the ordinance, it previously said to conduct retail business with members of the public or other businesses. We removed that language or other businesses such that it's only prohibiting conducting retail business with members of the public during those hours. They are free to receive deliveries.
Okay.
Do we have any direction from the council?
I like it as it is. I think 12 o'clock's fair. I think it's
Okay.
works.
I agree with that. I think it's a good compromise.
So, someone want to make a motion?
I move that we accept the resolution as recommended by staff, or the ordinance, rather, I'm sorry.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Could we get a roll call?
Councilmember Dearness?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Wait.
No.
Mayor Toussaint?
Yes, that passes 4-1. Let's see. With that, we're almost 8 o'clock. I think you guys like to have a bathroom break for about 5 minutes around this time. So
What else for?
it's usually me. All right. So with that, we'll take a 5-minute bathroom break and resume. We're going to start with item number 7 on the agenda. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
Item 7, medical cannabis dispensary ordinance and regulatory permit application process review.
Can we get a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This evening, the matter before you is for the council to provide staff with direction regarding potential changes to the adopted cannabis regulation ordinance and/or the resolution setting the number of dispensaries within the city, or to the approved application and selection process. As by way of history, back in August of last year, the City Council adopted an ordinance that would comprehensively regulate cannabis within the city and establish the allowance of medical cannabis dispensaries within the C3 zone. And there were a lot of provisions set forth in that ordinance regarding the selection process and also activities such as manufacture, production, and testing. That ordinance went into effect at the end of September of last year. Following the ordinance going into effect, City Council adopted a resolution that set the number of allowable medical cannabis dispensaries within the city at 1, and it directed staff to return with the specifics of the application process. That application process came back to Council in December of 2018. The Council approved the application selection process and the associated fees. The copies of those ordinances, resolutions, and application process are attached. The application process began in January and ran through the end of February. The C3 zone district only contains 2 properties, one of which is apparently not available for cannabis dispensary use, so there's effectively only 1 property available. And consistent with other cities, the original ordinance had a requirement of landowner consent or landowner authorization for a medical cannabis dispensary, such that the owner would have to be aware of and consent to the location of a cannabis dispensary within the property. So at the expiration of the application period, there were 3 applications received by the city. 2 of the applicants were rejected for failing to provide that landowner consent and acknowledgement, and the permit applications are attached for those 3 applicants. The last remaining applicant did obtain the owner's signature on the application, apparently is in escrow for the purchase of the property. So at the March 11th council meeting, the last council meeting, the council directed the staff to place a discussion item on this agenda so the council can discuss potential changes to the aforementioned application process. And therefore, staff recommends that the council discuss and provide staff with direction on what you would like to do. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of the staff report?
Yes.
Okay, Karen?
As with the subject matter of the no-show showdown for the special meeting that we had, once again, something is popped on an agenda that comes as a total surprise, and I did not give the nod to bring this ordinance back, if you recall, in our last meeting. So I want to know actually why we're discussing this. I'd like to know from my council members why this is on the agenda. I mean, what happened? We have set policies already in place, and if we have applicants that don't have the permission of a landowner or a property owner to have a dispensary, why is it that we're discussing this? I mean, surely we cannot make somebody who owns a building or owns property put a dispensary on their property or in their building. So why are we discussing this? And I'd kind of like to know, I would like to know when this was discussed, who was involved, and where.
Okay. So just to briefly, and again, we should really save this for discussion with the council, but I did notice some issues with regard to our ordinance, and I did bring it up at the council and did receive at least 3 nods. So I'm sorry I didn't get yours, but I did have some concerns regarding this process, and those concerns I will bring up tonight. With that, are there any other questions of staff?
No.
Okay. We'll take this out to public comment. Let's see. We'll start with Sunny Vogel. There's only 3, so 3.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Sunny Vogel, and I represent the flower trade. I'm going to share a little bit about myself and why I'm here today, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we found with the application process. In 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and medical cannabis saved my life. After multiple issues with chemo, my treatment was about to be discontinued, and I was going to just be on palliative care, and there was nothing more to do. Sorry, it's very personal. I tried cannabis, and within minutes, I felt relief. After continuing on with cannabis, it eventually allowed me to continue on with treatment, and I'm here today because of that. Thank you, Cottage Hospital, thank you, the oncology at Samsung, and thank you, cannabis. As a cancer patient, I understand the importance of securing quality, safe, targeted cannabis in a safe therapeutic environment. That is the cornerstone of my business, the flower trade. My team has over 8 years of dispensing experience, and my partners hold the first permanent state license in California. I'm here tonight to ask the council to actually revisit the application process, remove the land use component, so we can actually have a really well thought out, or look at all the candidates that played fair during this process. The application process outlined gave the one landowner the ability to select the applicant based on a backroom deal and not merit, quality, and what is best for the community and what is best for the patients of Solvang. And I'm here today to fight for those patients of Solvang. By removing the land use, the patients in the community will have a great community business partner that follows the rules. We tried multiple times. We made offers to purchase the building through an LOI. I've included that in our cannabis application. I was directed by the city staff to actually reach out to council to share the story of what transpired. We did everything in our power. The lease amounts we exceeded through our LOI, the lease amounts that were being requested. We were not shown the inside of the ability. I came to meet with one of the leasing agents, and I was denied access into the building because the owner of the building had to be there, but they were the leasing agents. And then after pushing and pushing and pushing, 2.5 weeks later, we were able to see the inside. No owner was there, but we were able to see the inside, and it didn't allow for a lot of due diligence on some of the process. So we're just asking that if you removed the land use and you allow for just the qualifications and the merit, and then after the council goes through the whole process and there's a lotto system, then give the actual applicant 30, 60, or 90 days to secure a property. We came in well capitalized. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And I have met with the company's Flower Trade, Diverse Real Estate Solutions, and Fristeden Wellness. And I'm putting them first so that the public has time to comment on anything that they have said. Let's see. The next one I have is Raza Lawrence.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, and thanks for considering this topic. My law firm, Margolin & Lawrence, I'm here with my law partner, Allison Margolin, and also attorney Tiffany Carrari, who works at our Central Coast office in Santa Maria. And our law firm has processed cannabis applications throughout the state in multiple categories, and we're helping Fristeden Wellness through this application. Just a little background about our client. The applicant, Fristeden Wellness, is based in Ventura, but they're actually a publicly traded company on the Canadian Stock Exchange. They are very well capitalized, and they have a number of other licenses in California and also Oregon. And their background is actually in the rehab industry, and that's, I think, a very interesting angle for Solvang. There's a lot of people with opiate addictions who have been shifting towards medical cannabis, and we believe that our client's background in the rehab industry, combined with Solvang's attraction for elderly residents and tourists, et cetera, that this will be a unique spot with our clients, bringing a lot to the table. We are the only party, I understand, that filed an appeal in this case. We submitted, we believe, a very strong application, and we submitted it with land, with an alternative property owner authorization for one outside the zone. And our position is the city has a lot of leeway in terms of zoning issues, but there are certain lines, legal lines and restrictions on the zoning, and if it becomes so narrow that there's only one property, that's essentially delegating authority to that property owner to select who it is that will receive the license. So this is what we believe an impermissible delegation of authority to a property owner, and that also results in giving monopoly power to that single property owner. And our position is that the zoning is too restrictive in this case, that we would propose allowing all three applicants who applied to move forward in the process and to hold a hearing as to whether their particular location is sufficient or be given a chance to find another location. Our position is just that having only one available property is too restrictive, and that the city should allow applicants, including these three who applied so far, to apply with an alternative location. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have Nancy Emerson. Followed by Aaron Peterson.
Nancy Emerson speaking as a resident of Solvang. I've been studying the county's inland cannabis land use ordinance and its cannabis business license ordinance in connection with WeWatch work on those ordinances since about December. And I was going to talk more generally about the ordinance, but I thought that maybe the thing that would be most helpful to you would be to know what's happening with the county regarding retail operations. Just, you know, seeds for thought. So the situation as the county business license ordinance is currently written is that they're going to allow 8 storefront retail licenses, and those are going to be distributed among the 8 different unincorporated areas of the county, so that the valley will potentially have one other cannabis outlet retail establishments. They call them storefront retail license. They are going through a qualifying process. And so they're pre-qualifying people, and then they're placed on a retail license eligibility list. And then eventually there will be random drawings. Now, the county is not in the same position you are, where you designated a zone in which cannabis retail establishment could operate. But I think there might be some food for thought in this process where you do a pre-qualifying list. And maybe the thing we have to look at is the question of whether the C3 zone is the only place that it would be appropriate in the city. I think that when that decision was made, there was not a very thorough look at where it might be appropriate for a medical dispensary to be located. So that's my thoughts on it. Okay?
Thank you very much. Aaron Peterson.
Evening, Aaron Peterson, Solvang. I urge you to keep the ordinance as it is. I'm not saying take it away. I'm not saying expand it. We did think it through. The city did consider it. We do have many zones in town, and the C3 is not one property. There's 2 properties, and just because one landlord doesn't wish to lease that, could lease it later. Maybe somebody could go through and change their zone from a C2 to a C3, and as for a zone change, that's happened before. there's so many unknown things that are out there dealing with marijuana, retail sales, medical also. Urge you to wait and see. There's no reason to do this right now. We've got a new city council, we have new city managers, we have a new planning commission, we have a new BAR, we have some staff that are leaving, some staff that are coming on. We've got some issues that we need to deal with. If it's looking at the process, I don't understand the process because I haven't looked at the process, then modify the process, come up with a better process that holds up under scrutiny if we didn't do that right or if the city didn't do it right. I get it. Don't have a problem with that. Buellton said no, absolutely. Buellton said no. We said one, or we didn't say one, we said one zone for medical only, and let's wait and see. But we don't need to change it right now. We haven't even worked through the process yet, as the county hasn't, as the cities haven't around. Now we're going to find out the same thing that Ms. Emerson said, that the county is going to allow in the unincorporated areas, one in the valley. It'll be in San Ynez, or it will be in Los Olivos. Those are the unincorporated commercial districts. It's not going to be in Janin Acres. It's not going to be out by the high school. It's going to be in the commercially zoned things. They're always done in zones. That's what commercial zoning is done for. So to take the land use issue out of it, we never take the land use issue out of it, or we'd be building multiple family houses in LSL Glen next to single family houses. It's silly to even argue that point. Again, if what you need to do is you need to look at the process, go ahead and look at the process. If it isn't a fair process, there's other zones, the industrial zone that's down there also by the C3. If you guys want to look at that, we can look at that in a year. Just take a breath, a wait and see. There's no urgency in this. And please don't just, because somebody's threatening a lawsuit or threatening veiled threats with lawsuits, don't buy into that and panic over it. Just take a breath. We've got good legal counsels. I mean, I wish I was a lawyer and I could give you, I am a lawyer and I'm giving you good advice.
All right. Allison. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I represent for Student Wellness along with my partner Raza, who spoke. Just wanted to add a little bit more to kind of the subject. We've done licensing across the state of California, as well as in Massachusetts. We just did our first in Cape Cod. And so we've appeared and handled these licenses in front of a lot of very small communities. And what seems to be a common practice to avoid this, it's not about taking the land use out of it, but places like, for example, Pasadena in Southern California, which is also a small community that had a very competitive contest, only chose 6. They allowed the applicants, for example, to apply. They do a merit-based process, and then once the applicants are chosen, then they have a certain period of time to choose a location, which is, of course, in the zone that's selected by the city. And by doing this, then obviously it prevents the situation that I had here, which, just so you guys are aware, we're not making any, we don't think this is a conspiracy. This is something that's happened as a result of situations. So it's not like, we're not alleging that there was some kind of untoward thing that happened. Unfortunately, just the circumstance. The one property wasn't, the landlord wouldn't allow it, and then the other landlord did what we understand. He ended up selling the property, or now it's in escrow. So it's just the situation that arose is what made this problematic, we think, under the law and under due process. And we just think that our suggestion, at least, is that the applicants who applied, the 3, be able to be evaluated on their merits, and then whoever is chosen would then have be able to go back to the property owner, or if you decided to expand the zoning, they would have time to be able to choose within the zone where they would like to be with the consent of the property owner. And then this brings the decision-making back to those who are supposed to be in charge of it, which are obviously the consultants and the city council and those who are making the decisions, and not the property owner. And this happened, like we said, by a situation. It wasn't obviously the intention of the council. We've gone through the meetings and all of the attention that was provided and really made towards coming up with the right zoning. But this is just what happened due to the situation, and our proposal at least would be to allow the 3 to go on and then either expand the zoning or maybe have a conversation with the property owner, because it seems that perhaps if it turned out that the person in escrow isn't chosen, then maybe he won't be buying the property. So maybe there's a way to revisit this issue after a merit-based analysis is done. And thank you for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you very much. No more speaker slips. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Gay?
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. I just want to say two things. The Planning Commission selected Zone C3 for a reason, and the reason was that these cannabis outlets, retail or medical, retail, commercial or medical, can't be built or allowed in proximity to children. And in Solvang, and our town is very small in area, and very small in population, doesn't compare it to Pasadena in the least. But the C3 zone is the only zone that is far enough away from residences where children spend the most time. Yes, they're in school, yes, they may be in daycare, but they spend more time at home playing in their yards and so forth, and the C3 zone is the only one that's far enough away from children to allow this kind of an establishment. The other thing that I wanted to remind you all of is that deliveries of cannabis are allowed into the city, and anybody can call a delivery service and get what they need. It's not like we're denying medical patients their medical marijuana. So thank you.
Thank you, Gay. Sorry, David, you would like to speak?
David Rasmussen, Solvang. I'd encourage you to leave the ordinance the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll take it back to the council. Okay, Jeff Clay. After that, I gotta cut it because I don't have the speaker slips. So,
Jeff Clay, Solvang. You said if we agree with someone to say that, agree with Aaron totally. And I'm against any sort of marijuana dispensary. Just let that be known any way, shape, or form. Having said that, the city council holds a lot of power, and I appreciate your public service. I truly do. With the exception of Miss Waite, you're all very new in your position, neophytes. The perception is one of disorganization and a little ineptitude, last Wednesday being my example. Don't let your legacy be one of making bad decisions on this issue. This is a big deal. It's going to make a big deal for a lot of people for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, actually, I do take issue with it because we've already had. I think you're with First and. It's the same business, and it's like now it's 3 speakers. Lee, if you would like to speak, I think I had yours for item number 8, but
I wrote the wrong number.
Okay.
I had too much. I got stoned. Anyhow, yeah, I have tremendous respect for the medical benefits of cannabis. I have 2 friends who have gone through the same experience as the young lady who spoke earlier and benefited tremendously. I also have many friends who, for reasons of sleeplessness, for reasons of anxiety, for reasons which I call soft rationale, have acquired medical prescriptions for cannabis. And it is not a situation where they required it. It is simply a way of getting a physician to prescribe it. So I'll give you a little scenario. We have, let's say we're in San Diego. We have Bob and Laurie Smith and their son Jerry. And Bob says to Laurie, hey, we got a 3-day weekend coming up, and I understand Solvang is dispensing pot. Let's go up there and get stoned, and then we can get pissed on the wine and play some blackjack. Sounds like a hell of a 3-day weekend. And Jerry pops up and says, hey, wait a minute. I'm 18. I'm allowed to have some of this stuff. Let's go up there together and bond. Now, this property here is at the entrance to the city. This property need not be a dispensary. There is no rationale, no reason for it. It is simply a profit-making operation. And I say that with ultimate respect for those who really need the weed. But I think it's the wrong thing for the city to pose to have the aspect of a medical dispensary, so to speak, at the entrance to the city. And the mark of that on the city itself from the outside is as I have described it. Hey, let's go get some weed and have a hell of a time. I think that's wrong, and you don't like it, Chris?
I can't ask a question, sorry.
Well, okay, thanks. I see you shaking your head and smiling.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
right, okay.
please, I need to maintain order here.
So ease off. Thank you.
Last one, Hank.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Hank Homburg. I live in Solvang. I'm not from Oregon or LA or Pasadena or wherever they're from. But the building in question, I believe, is owned by the Catholic Church, I thought. And it's a gateway property. Do we want to have a retail operation like that at a gateway property? So my suggestion for the lawyers behind me is that perhaps they can address the Chumash Casino, and they can have a little store downstairs in the Chumash Casino, because that's where most of the drug abusers are going to lately. According to the sheriff's blotter that we see in the paper, they make meth busts and pot busts all the time there. So we don't need it in Solvang. Thank you very much.
Okay. With that, we're going to take this back to the council for discussion and action. Who would like to start? Chris, could you please, because I mean, it'll get the audience, just chill.
I would agree. I don't think that's the right place to put it. My concern, my concern is that we did create a monopoly. I think the application process and I think the way it all came down was done incorrectly. Whether or not we're at fault or not, I don't think it's right to provide the landowner the last say on where a business should be conducted. So I do think it needs to be addressed.
Okay. Robert?
For the most part, I agree entirely with what Aaron said. As chairman of the Planning Commission at the time that we were asked to address this, we were given a couple of different locations, and one of them was over by Sansom, and that was our first thought was, well, if that's where they're prescribing it, then let's put it by them, but it's not a residential, there's kids there, and so on and so forth. It came down to this location because it was the last location that made any sense at all. I wish this whole thing with pot would go away because I can't stand it. And if you really want to, you can drive to Lompoc between the hours of 10 and 8 p.m. and buy pot on Ocean Avenue just by showing your driver's license. The whole medical crap I don't get, because you don't need a prescription to buy pot anymore in this state. And 20-minute drive down the highway, you can buy pot. You can get anything you want down there. So I wish that we didn't have to deal with this at all. I don't want pot, and I don't, buying pot on Main Street in Disneyland is what it reminds me of. I don't want pot in Solvang. But if we have to, a real slow wait and see, pretty much I could just say verbatim what Aaron Peterson said, and I agree with entirely with what the points that he brought up.
Karen? Okay.
Thank you, Karen. First of all, I encourage you guys, before you speak, read the agenda packet. It's out there for everybody to see before the meeting, and I think you'll see what we're looking at as opposed to what Lee Rosenberg was trying to say. I don't know where he's coming from. I don't know why he wasted our time and disrespected the council. We're doing the best we can for the majority of the residents. That's where it starts. Now, I agree completely with Daniel. I think the problem is the process itself. I don't understand how the council was supposed to decide who goes there in terms of one of three candidates. And somehow it ended up being reversed where the property owner was the one that ended up choosing one of the three. I think there's a problem with the process, and I'd like to figure out how we fix that before we move forward.
Karen?
First of all, to the businesses, I want to make it very clear that in no way am I trying to disparage the quality of your products or your business or the integrity of this. I actually was one of the council members that put forth the ordinance to bring a medical marijuana clinic into the city of Solvang, and I did do a draft ordinance for taxation along with Mr. Mayor Toussaint here. It appears to me that there seems to be some collaboration going on regarding this particular subject. And what I would like to say is that I don't think we should change the ordinance, and I am almost at the point where I want to throw the whole thing out, go back to no, and just start this over. When it comes down to having attorneys for organizations and companies come and stand in front of us and speak, stating that they think that a landowner or a business owner should not be able to make their own decision as to who they can rent or lease to is absolutely, it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, unfortunately, these businesses weren't chosen by this particular landlord. Unfortunately, this particular landlord decided to maybe sell to someone else. You can't make somebody sell their property to you just because you want to open up a business in that location. So this needs to be scrapped. This just needs to be scrapped, and either leave it as it is or just scrap it and start over.
Well, which would you rather do, scrap it or leave it as it is?
I would leave the ordinance as is. I don't think that there's a problem with it, and I don't think that we have done anything wrong in looking at the applications. One of the qualifications for being accepted was to have the landlord or the owner of the building accept the tenant. And if you are a business that wasn't accepted, well, that's the owner's prerogative.
Yeah, my only concern is that, say you have these three businesses that are putting in an application and the landowner knows he wants to sell his building. There's only one application that really wants to buy the building. Whose is he going to accept? That, I believe that provides a conflict of interest.
Well, I think the landowner can sell to whoever he wants.
He can sell to whoever he wants. What I'm saying is if we have three applications and they're all great applications, why should we let the landowner decide who gets to be in their building just because one person wants to buy it?
Because it's his building.
That's great.
He can decide what he wants.
That's great, but I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right to the other two applicants who have a great application. That's what I'm saying.
Can I set up
I'm sorry. We have to maintain order here. You know, one of my reasons for bringing this up, there's several, and I remember deliberations over this last year, and my disappointment with what's going on with regard to today's process is I thought we were going to go through a vetting process, you know, maintain quality, see the overall project that's going to go in there. I'm extremely concerned about making sure that we get a good final design product in there. It's just like any other development project. You have the mercantile that's being done. It all goes through the processes. It's open to the public. They know what's going to go in there tomorrow. Well, my biggest concern is when this LOA in here, and I'm not saying that this is any fault of the Planning Commission, city attorney, or anyone else. It's just that there may have been some unintended consequences with this current ordinance the way it is written, because it's basically going to negate the vetting process and interviews that would go through the council. And in my eyes, I would rather just see, I think a more fair and equitable way of doing it would be to change the order in which you do it. If you have an application process and everyone gets to go through that same process and go through the vetting process by the city council, get that feedback, have more control over the final product that goes in there, quality, vetting, you know, everything. And then the qualified candidates out of that is then delivered to the property owner. It's up to them what they want to do after that. If they only want to work with one particular vendor or anyone that wants to buy their building, you know, that's up to the landowner there. Like I said, I agree we cannot force them to do it, but the one thing is we are handing a lotto ticket with the sense that we do not have that we're putting the cart before the horse, essentially. So you're allowing the property owner to first choose the business and then say, here you go, city, here's your one applicant, and that's the only person that's going to get through. That is not fair to me. That is not transparent to me. It's not fair to the public. I think that all candidates should come here and show their projects, show their designs, go through our process, and then the qualified candidates can get delivered up to the landowner. If the landowner doesn't want to do any of it, then that's fine. That's, and again, part of the problem that we have with this current process is we only have one zone permitted that only has essentially one landowner. So that is handing out a lotto ticket. A lot of other cities, maybe they do it that way, and that might be fine, but you're talking about ordinances when you start looking at Goleta, West Hollywood, anywhere where they have this, typically through that process there, they're approving multiple locations where you have multiple landlords, everything. That actually creates competition and the free market and everything. And then through that vetting process, then you have the lotto system that determines the final candidate. In that sense, everyone's going to feel like they had a fair shot at it. In this here, it's totally reverse. We don't get those interviews and that vetting process from the council. Quite frankly, there's only one candidate here that basically is already potentially making it through our vetting process, and I have no clue about the site plan, what their intended thing is, whole 9 yards. To me, that brings up some concerns, and it makes me very hesitant to approve this here. And again, it's no blame that I'm putting on anyone or the planning commission. It's just some unintended consequences that we're running into. We're a small city. We have limited areas where we can put this. We need to find a better way of doing it. And that's the reason why I brought this up on the agenda for discussion. I am all for just postponing this. There's lots of things that are changing. I think Nancy Emerson made some good comments about things are going on with the county. Everything around us is moving. Do we need to really attack this right now? Maybe we should take a breath and sit on this for a little bit, rethink about some of the concerns that were brought up through this process, and go back to the drawing board, and then reopen this back up for another application process. One of my disappointments here, or actually my biggest disappointment here, is the fact that we only have 3 candidates. I want to see more.
I agree with everything you said, except we're still running into the same problem where you've got one landowner, and now that's already gone because apparently it's been sold.
So again,
We have to delay this.
I can't speak for any of that. I don't know if the building's been sold. I'm only talking policy. And what my concern is that is exactly what I just explained. One of the ways of solving the issue is to potentially look and see that if we are going to do this here in the city, is there a second location that could be approved? Originally, when I worked on this, my original thought for where I put it, and this was public, I liked the medical area of town. When I refer to that, I mean over by the hospital. They have doctors' offices, professional offices over there. To me, it just makes sense that it goes over there. Now, that could maybe go back to the planning commission for more deliberations on. Maybe it's just a bad idea. Maybe we can't get this down to where it's not just one landowner and a lottery ticket. Maybe I just don't like this process now that I'm seeing the unintended consequences of the ordinance that we approved. And that's okay. But again, I am totally fine completely scrapping this, going back to the drawing board on it, seeing what's going on with the county, rethinking if we can find a more fair and equitable way for all parties, and starting this over.
I got to ask a question. Has that building, is it in escrow? Is that what I heard? Is that true? Who knows this answer?
Well, that's what I read in the agenda information. Tiffany Carrari, born and raised in Santa Barbara County on behalf of Margolin and Lawrence, and I still live here today.
I'm sorry, can you,
I would be shocked if the escrow is not contingent on the buyer obtaining the cannabis license, considering the fact that this is why we're here. These people want to open a dispensary there, and they offered to purchase the property. I'd be shocked if that weren't the case. I don't know it for sure, but
logically, it makes sense to me that someone would make a contingent on that, because a type of sale like that, and they don't even know for sure if they're going to get through the vetting process. To me, that would just seem like a poor business decision. But that's just my personal perspective on it.
Okay, to me, it sounds like sour grapes. It just sounds like sour grapes that we have We have companies that were not chosen, not
Chris,
based upon
please.
their licenses or their merits, which I was saying, I mean, that was never in question. What was in question was the location, and they were not chosen by the landlord, by the owner, for that location. So, when we first did the ordinance, changed the ordinance, we were trying to get local control over a state or a county-controlled activity. And I really thought that we would have more applicants also. I thought we would. And I thought we might have more business owners or you know, landlords and willing to take in dispensaries. Well, that didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So it needs further examination, further use. So either we start over or we leave it as is and wait for a new administration to come in and take a second look at this.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, do you have?
Mr. Mayor, if I could add, during the process, I had several calls from applicants, and I believe that many mentioned the fact that they wanted to know if the city of Solvang was going to move also towards recreational. That was the majority of the questions. So I think that we got fewer applicants due to the medical-only aspect of the business.
I've also seen that there's complaints in here about how applicants were not able to meet with the property owner or real estate agent or something like that, and that also can deter a lot of people. I do also understand the questions around recreational, because when you're trying to determine, especially the value of something, the second the city then, you know, puts recreational, that's going to significantly increase the valuation of the of even the property there. So I do see all that. Again, I'm still staying from the original reason or reasons why I was okay with moving forward. This is supposed to be a compassion thing for the residents of the valley who want or need this product. I stand by that, and we need to make sure we're providing a clean and safe facility with quality product. One of the issues I see here is you have a lottery ticket issue, as there's only one landlord that now has direct control over the process and completely negates any healthy and needed competition afforded by multiple options provided in the free market. And that's my stance on this. With that, I am more than happy to just completely blow this out, have it reconsidered, and come back to it. And I don't think that there's any rush on it.
Yeah, make the motion.
That's my motion.
Okay, I've heard everything that the council has said. You have a number of options open to you. First of all, the process is what the prior council adopted. It is the law of Solvang right now. You have the option of changing that law. You can change the ordinance, you can change the resolution, you can change the application process. I will point out the cities you mentioned, Goleta, West Hollywood, County of Santa Barbara, City of Santa Barbara. They all have a requirement that the landowner consent as part of the application process. The reason for that is if you go through the process of vetting the applicants and then you send them out into the market and then nobody wants to rent to them, you've wasted a lot of time, energy, and money. Whereas if you know that there is a location, there is a landlord there that is willing to undertake having a client there that potentially could subject that landlord to federal prosecution, because remember, it's still a controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act. Whether that's going to actually happen, probably not. That horse is out of the barn at this point. But the reality is, without that landowner consent at some point in the process, it makes it very difficult. But that being the case, the reason you're here today is not necessarily because of the landowner consent, but because there's only one zone in which it's available. If the council changed its mind about the number of zones, the number of dispensaries, where it could be, then the market opens back up. You still can get your landowner consent, and you still have opportunities for the free market to govern. I think removing the landowner consent as part of the application process is going to run into a problem, because you will have whatever selection process that you have in a vacuum. You don't know what the security plan is going to be, because you have no idea what the building looks like. You have no idea what the shape is. You have no idea where the cameras are going to be. These are all things that are part of the application process before we even bring the vetting process to the council to make those determinations. And in the existing process that we have, there was only one applicant who received the landowner's consent for that. Those are the rules that we have in place right now that we've been directed to follow, and we will continue to do that until the council changes those rules. But if you're looking for a way to solve the problem of this landowner consent, it's not the landowner consent the problem, it's the land that's the problem. And if the council wants to go that route, I recommend you take a look at other zones in the city. That's how you can get to where you want to go with that, for those who are interested in opening it up the process more.
So, and with that, again, I just want to make it very clear that I fully agree and understand what you're saying. I do understand the ordinance as it's written. I just think that because of our specific scenario here in Solvang with only one landowner, that there's been some unintended consequences and maybe the order at which we're going. We still, yes, the landowner needs to consent that, to have whoever go in there or buy the building. We cannot dictate that. But if we reevaluate the order in which we pursue the process, we can have control over saying, these are the vetted companies we feel comfortable letting into our community. And with that, the landowner can then decide what they want to do. Like I said, if they don't want any of it, they don't want any of it. If it's 3 candidates, if it's 10 candidates that's given to them, they can choose from that. If it's 2 locations, and that's a lotto issue, but we're only going to allow 1 dispensary in the city of Solvang, then it can go for a lotto between the 2 locations. That is a fair and open process.
And I'll just point out that I'm unaware of any community that has either recreational or medical dispensaries that does not contain a landowner consent as part of the application process. Solvang would be the outlier on that.
Well, I'm not saying to take it out.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying
and that's not at all what I'm saying.
As part of the application process is what I'm saying.
Okay. So I'm just
and
saying.
All the cities that you mentioned before,
right,
and Solvang currently have that as part of the application packet. That's why those 2 were denied. They did not have that.
Right.
If you remove that from the application process, Solvang will be the outlier.
Mm-hmm. And I do understand that, but again, you know, it's nothing that was wrong done here. I'm just standing by the fact that all the other cities that were mentioned would have more locations, more landlords, everything, which is going to create competition in the market. This situation right here takes that away. So because of that, we need to recognize our size and the way that our policies are written so that we can have better control of the product. We don't just have to do what everyone is doing just because they're doing it. We have very unique circumstances here in Solvang. Everywhere you look, we are a very small little community here. So it is hard to craft this. It's going to be a challenge for anyone to deliberate on. The Planning Commission, city attorney, staff. And this is a challenging issue. And on top of it, it's all changing around us. So with that, I would just like to go, if we're going to move on this, I don't think there's any hurry. I'm fully happy to scrap the whole thing. But with the feedback and where we're at today, I think it would really behoove us to just take a step back, evaluate the issues that we've run into, and just relook at how the ordinance is written and see if we can craft it in a better way so that we do encourage more competition. And like I said, if it comes down and there's 10 applicants and only, you know, and all 5 or 10, all 10 are approved or 5 are approved, then that's what goes to the landowner and he can choose from those. But we need to make sure that we are going to get a quality product here. You know, we need to take control over that product. I don't want to let something in here that all of a sudden 6 months later I'm sitting here like, oh my God, what did I do? You know, we need to reevaluate. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, in that case, if the council is inclined to go that direction, and it sounds that at least 3 of the council members are interested in going that direction, staff needs direction on how we vet the various applications in the absence of that landowner consent at the outset, because we need to figure out a security plan. We need to figure out the physical layout. How will all that be determined in advance of them actually having a location?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, point of clarification, we have not yet vented the last candidate. So the assumption is that the applicant could be having a substandard application. That may not be the case. We're still going through the process on that. So whatever decision you make tonight, we need to have some direction as to what we do with that last applicant, because they're still going through the process.
So I guess with that, I mean, this is a challenging issue, but if if it seems like there's consensus of the council to kind of go down the path that I'm trying to describe here, then maybe we can get some direction from staff on how we best go about doing that. Would that be appropriate, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can certainly ask staff to come back with some recommendations on how best to accomplish that, and we can certainly take a look and see if there are any other exemplars. I don't pretend to have looked at every cannabis ordinance. I've probably looked at 30 or 40 of them. So I'm fairly familiar with how it's done in other cities throughout the community or throughout the state. Spoken with other city attorneys, spoke with the city attorney just today about their experiences. And we had a laugh that 10 years ago, if you had told us that our legal careers would spend even 5 minutes on the discussion of legalization of cannabis for recreational use. That was not something that any of us had anticipated at that point. So to a certain extent, we are learning as we go in the city attorney community. City councils are learning as they go what's right for each of the communities. And the experiences that we will have 10 years from now will be even better, guided by what we know then. But at least at this point, to give staff direction to look at the process, we will continue to process the existing application to determine whether or not it meets the requirements. But as I said, one of the easy solutions is for the council to take a look at other zones within the city if that's appropriate. Another one is to change the resolution to increase the number of dispensaries. Those are certainly very simple solutions that we could have. As far as the application process, there may be a way that we can conceptually come up with a security plan for a non-existent location or a proposed location. They may identify various locations that they think might work and get an idea from the landlords. But ultimately, we are going to have a landlord consent provision at some point in there. So I can't recommend to you that you get rid of that provision, even if in this particular situation it results in a potentially unanticipated consequence.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Oh, and by the way, real quick, I do agree that the LOA needs to be in there at some point. It's just the order and the location issue. I'm just trying to address this whole what I feel like is like a lotto ticket issue, and create a more fair and equitable process to all parties. Robert.
I remember some of the roadblocks to the Planning Commission's decision on where the location was. Do you open this back up? Do we send this back to the Planning Commission and have them rehash the same arguments about locations?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we could do is if we give staff to kind of take into consideration some of the feedback and issues that we brought up here, maybe reevaluate the process and come up with a new staff report that's delivered to the Planning Commission, then the Planning Commission could deliberate on this with a little more detail. Would that be inappropriate?
Well, ultimately, you're going to need to give direction to your Planning Commission as to what you want. Give them kind of open-ended recommendation. Hey, take a look at this. Give us recommendations. You need to give them very clear decisions. And in other words, we want to look at an additional zone. We want to look at an additional dispensary. We want to look at zoning implications. That's the Planning Commission's charge. The life safety health issues, that's the city council's charge. So security plans, that's really not something that the Planning Commission is going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at the land use issues. So you need to give them very specific direction as to what it is that you want them to do. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting a recommendation that doesn't really recommend anything. It just returns the ball to your side of the table.
Okay. Oh, and then my last question about all this was, in our ordinance, there is some verbiage in there around some form of development agreement, and I just want to know if there's any sense in further evaluation of entering, throughout part in this process at some point, if we did some form of development agreement so that we really know what's going in there and can bring that forth publicly and deliberate on that. Is that in any way achievable? Is that a good idea? Is it a bad idea? I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, the provisions that you have in the development agreement, it talks about a development agreement and operations plan allowed by this chapter shall be subject to the review and approval of city council prior to the issuance of the regulatory permit. So it's not a development agreement in the sense of the traditional development agreement adopted by an ordinance where you are specifying all of the provisions of land use, the height, the setbacks, and so on, where you can vary from traditional zoning standards through a development agreement. This is more an operations plan where you understand what is going to be in there. And that's really what we're talking about for that provision in the ordinance, as opposed to your traditional development agreement.
Okay. And my last question is just, I believe shortly below that part of the ordinance, it was kind of describing some subjective areas built in for the city manager to determine if the applicant is desirable or not.
Well, the desirability is based on the standards that the council set forth in the ordinance. That's basically what the city manager is going to be basing it on. The city manager doesn't have free-flowing discretion to approve or disapprove. And even if that were the case, there are provisions for an appeal to the city council. So ultimately, if an applicant is unhappy with the decision of the city manager, there is an appellate process that the city council can entertain from those. And in fact, the next agenda item will be setting the date on one such appeal from a determination of staff. So that is the outlet valve in the ordinance.
Okay. Anyone else? So with that, is there, kind of hearing that feedback and what the council maybe appears to be open to at this point, is there any suggested roadmap from staff about how we could go about accomplishing this in a productive way?
Well, I think at the very least, you should give staff direction to see if there are ways to prioritize the selection process, leaving the letter of agreement from the landlord to a later time. That is something that we can certainly explore and provide alterations to the process. You might consider giving staff direction to see if there are other zones that would be appropriate. That's already been talked about fairly extensively. I don't know that staff is going to be able to provide any additional guidance other than what's been provided by your planning commission and the council itself. So I don't know that you want to put that on staff, but you could certainly also take a look and see if there is a reason to have more than one dispensary in town from either an economic or business standpoint. That's something we could look at. But I think what you're more concerned about is really the process at this point. Ultimately, you're going to need to make the tough decision as to whether or not you want to add additional zones and add additional dispensaries. Those are really easy decisions for the council in terms of the execution of them. The policy behind it will be difficult because you're going to have a lot of discussions as to whether or not it's appropriate to have more than one or another zone. But changing the resolution from 1 to 2, that's very easy for the council to do. It just requires a meeting, the resolution gets adopted. The ordinance, you're going to have to change it a little bit because that's only in the C3 zone. You'll have a first reading, second reading, and 30 days thereafter. You got about minimum 45 days lead time to change the zones in which these are permitted. But there is a pathway to do that if you wish to do that.
Okay. So with that, would it be appropriate that we just make a motion to direct staff to reevaluate ways to prioritize the process, possibly consider other zones, such as the one I mentioned earlier, or just basically any other process thing we brought up here, you know, the staff can come back with potentially some recommendations.
I think, would it be appropriate to leave the ordinance as is and direct staff to explore other processes for taking application? Because we don't want to be left without any ordinance.
Well, the ordinance remains in effect until you adopt an ordinance, either rescinding it or modifying it. It's the law of the city right now. We will continue to process the existing application that is in the process according to the existing ordinance. That's not something we're going to stop, nor should we, because they're in the process. It may, in fact, open the city to potential litigation should we stop the process right in the middle, change the rules in the middle. I would not want to recommend that to you. So we will continue to go on that front. But ordinances are like mouse traps. The mice get clever, change the ordinance a little bit, and you have to change them a little bit according to your experience. They're by no means ever perfect, and they're never meant to be perfect. They're never meant to be set in stone. So as we learn where the issues are that need to be changed, we change the ordinance. So if the council believes that there is a problem with the application process, then we'll go through the regulatory permit application process, come up with some recommendations about how that might be addressed. But again, going back to the zones that you're looking at, there's not a lot that we need to do on that as staff. You all are going to make the decision whether or not you want it somewhere other than in the C3 zone. You all are going to make the decision very quickly, one way or another, as to whether or not you want more than one. And so those will be the decisions that will follow from the application process.
Okay.
We have a pet rat, that's why.
All right. I'm just trying to figure out how to craft a motion that kind of accomplishes what my head is really swarming with everything with regard to this ordinance. So I'm looking for, I guess, what some of my goals were that really, if I were to surmise all my points here, is a way to reprioritize the process, right? Not take out the LOA. At some point, yes, you need that. Pursue looking at another zone. It could still be a lottery system that comes between two different zones, and then that determines the ultimate location. And then just to reevaluate the process, just given the feedback that we've received here tonight, and if there's any merit around a development agreement or something like that, that maybe that's talked about, but I couldn't quite remember if you mentioned that that's possible or not.
Well, yeah, it's possible. It's part of our process. We're going to enter into that ultimately with the successful party. There's going to be some kind of agreement between the city, whether it's an indemnification agreement with additional provisions. Ultimately, that'll be for the successful party or parties to worry about. But as far as the development agreement, that's not something we need to get into as part of the application process necessarily, because we don't know ultimately who will be selected. And a development agreement, the concept of agreement is there's give and take. You work with them and try to figure out what's acceptable on both sides to best carry out the goals of both sides.
And the reason why I'm trying to talk about the development agreement is just that in my eyes, I have taken the time to visit a few dispensaries in places like West Hollywood, San Jose, God, where else? A few others. But there's definitely differences in them, and there's different feelings. There's different, some are almost like an Apple store, very clean. In my eyes, a better representation of the product, comfortability, visiting. I just want to make sure we get the best product for the community if we're going to go down this path of bringing in a cannabis dispensary into the city of Solvang. So that's why I'm interested in the development agreement, see if that accomplishes any of that.
It certainly could be part of a development agreement. I mean, setting the kind of standards for display of merchandise, the city's interest is more regulatory in the safety of the display, avoiding the access of it to minors. Those are the public safety health issues. Getting into design, you certainly, I suppose, could. That is a police power that we have. We've got the BAR, we've got the Planning Commission. Those are things that certainly you could get into, but that's not something that we will be able to craft regulations on necessarily, because I think it's one of those kind of things, you'll know it when you see it as a council, when you see the business plan, when you see the security plan, you say, okay, that one meets what we're trying to do. But that's going to be part of the application process before we bring in.
So that could be part of the selection process.
Well, if we get to that point where you have multiple candidates and the council has opened it up to additional zones, then you can pick among them. But if you're going to, and it should really, it should be, I don't want to say it should be kind of a random process, but it should be such that external influence can't come into the process. It should be based on objective standards that the council and the public can agree have been followed. So that's important as far as the transparency of government.
Got it. All right. So with that, I have my 3 points. Ways to reprioritize the process. We obviously still need the LOA. Pursue looking at other zones and reevaluate the process given the feedback that we have. If that kind of leaves open for staff to come back with some recommendations based on the feedback they've heard here tonight.
Are you looking at additional numbers of dispensaries, or are we working on the assumption that that remains at one?
I mean, my standpoint on that is I don't want to bring in any more than one if we're going to do this, but one.
I think we have to continue with the process. You can't exclude the one that's still in process, right?
No, you wouldn't exclude the one that's in the process.
So, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not in any hurry to approve this per se, but I want to make sure that it's fair and transparent. And so far, this is problematic in every way. So if it takes more time, then let's give it more time.
And I think that's what this is all about. So is the consensus one? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so as modified, one location. I'll move that. Is there a second?
Question, you said one location?
He did.
You previously
I'm
said.
sorry,
you said previous.
one dispensary. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Dispensary.
Yes.
Expand the locations.
I'm sorry, I gotta ask a question, because whether, again, I think Dave said it best, 10 years ago, if we would've been talking about this, no one would have thought this was impossible. And what we're missing is, eventually, whether we like it or not, somebody's gonna come and say, we need to have a place for a recreational dispensary, right? Are we gonna put this in the same zone? I didn't say I wanted this. I wanna make sure you guys understand that, right? But if we do go down this path, that's gonna come up. And how do we address that?
That's not
I'll
on
just,
our
just so I understand.
Putting this with respect to the zone that he's talking about. So if you have multiple zones, now you got an even bigger problem.
Well,
No.
the ordinance is very clear that recreational is not on the table, and we are not proposing, nor do I hear the council proposing, that change.
I know.
I think Chris is coming from the standpoint of, is what if all of a sudden the state comes down tomorrow and says, you have to allow recreational. So any dispensary that's currently medical only automatically is able to provide recreational. So I mean, I kind of maybe I'm misunderstanding.
right track,
Okay,
exactly.
so I think that's kind of where he's coming from. But part of doing this is, you know, you never know what's gonna come down or what's going to happen. They might say it's free for everyone. There could be 20 dispensaries in Solvang for all you know.
Yeah.
We can't control that. But if we do have any level of local control over the amount of locations that are in Solvang, then what we would have in that scenario is the one location in the area that we best sought fit, and then if it happens at that day and time, then okay, I guess they have recreational there. But that's like
I guess what
that's
I'm
like
saying-
the crystal ball.
I want to see a pathway. I don't think we can do that today. I don't think we can come to an agreement on that. But certainly it's something we have to discuss, right?
Well, I don't know that you need to discuss it. If the council is opposed to recreational dispensaries, you don't need to permit them.
I don't think we'd ever have to discuss it unless
Yeah,
the
it
state
doesn't,
comes
it
down, we
doesn't
have to
become an
evaluate.
issue unless you have state law, federal law preemption, where they force it on you. There is some discussion with respect to deliveries, that may be the case, that the state will mandate that deliveries be permitted.
Is that
so
is that currently discussion going on right now? Or
it's
is-
currently
okay.
being discussed in
So it's like it's
Sacramento.
already kind of moving in
Well, if I have a crystal ball, and believe me, if I had a crystal ball that I could predict what the legislature does, then I'd be a very rich man. But where I see it going ultimately is the state will look at it more like an Amazon model. It'll be delivery, and the state will be taking the taxes on it because the situs will be at the state. It won't be in the local delivery areas. So I think that the storefronts will continue to provide a service, but I think ultimately where I'm seeing the business going to be expanding dramatically in the delivery sector. That may be something that the city council, if it's not preempted by state law, may want to take a closer look at, depending on what the city's experience is with that. But if the state takes over the field, there's not much that I can do to help you with that.
Yeah. So again, I don't think it's So I agree. It's not much that we can do about it. It's out of our control. So all I can do is just do what is just stand for what I feel is best for our community today.
Okay, wrap it up.
I stand by my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Can you please repeat that
Yeah,
motion?
repeat the motion.
Yes.
So we all have an understanding as
So
to
we're going
what
to
it is.
direct, I believe we're going to direct staff to evaluate ways to prioritize the process. We're going to, I do believe that the LOA needs to stay in there. It's just a matter of where is it in the process. We need to pursue looking at other zones. I'm still saying only one dispensary, but if you approve more than one zone, now you've increased some competition with the free market. And then reevaluate the process given the feedback of what's been heard here at the meeting with regards to public comment, the council, kind of leave that open to staff to come back with suggestions.
While still maintaining our ordinance.
While still maintaining our ordinance, the current applicant would still go through the processes.
Mayor Toussaint?
Yes.
Councilmember Dearness?
Yes.
Councilmember Clark?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Wait.
Yes.
Passes 5-0. Talk about being buried in the weeds. Okay. Let's see. With that, we'll move on to item number 8. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
Item 8, set date for hearing of appeal of cannabis medical dispensary applicant, Fristed and Wellness.
Can we get a staff report?
Mayor Toussaint, member of councils, on December 10th, the City Council approved the application and selection process associated with the potential medical cannabis dispensary. The application period ran from January 21st through February 22nd, 2019. The city received 3 applications. 2 of the applications, as you know, were rejected for cause due to the lack of obtaining the property owner's authorization. One of the applicants, Fristed and Wellness, did submit a timely appeal based on the ordinance, and so I would recommend that the council set a date for the hearing of the appeal of Fristed and Wellness on the rejection of their medical cannabis dispensary application, or provide staff with an alternative date or direction.
Okay. Are there any questions of the staff report?
No.
Okay. With that, we'll go out to public comment. I have no speaker slips.
Can we speak for Fristed? I apologize.
Yes. Yeah.
Good evening again. We're here on behalf of Fristed and Wellness. My proposal would be that you would allow us to go through the process. I mean, we would also like to set the date for the appeal, but given the action on item 7, our proposal would be that you allow Fristed and Wellness to be evaluated in the process along with the other applicant who had the owner authorization. Or we can set the appeal, but I just thought, given action item on 7, that might be the most appropriate thing to do. One other thing I wanted to mention is that there's actually 3 ordinances that I know about that did the owner authorization in the order that the mayor is proposing. West Hollywood did not require owner authorization for the first part of this, Pasadena, as well as City of Commerce. So there's just 3 examples of cities that evaluated first on the merits, and then once they pick the applicants, then they get the approval. I just wanted to mention that for an example. But our proposal would be to just be considered in the process or to set the date for the appeal. But I think that the first suggestion is probably the best.
And I would just add that we don't want to waste the city's time on an appeal if this is all a moving process, that it could all become moot in the future. So I don't know if the city has any preference for how we should move forward given the city's ongoing considerations of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this? Okay, with that, we'll take it back to council for discussion and action. I just want to ask one question, and that's just about because of the action that was taken on item 7, would that impact staff's recommendation at this point?
Not from my standpoint. The only item that is before you on this is to just set the date on it. You will actually hear the appeal on whatever date that you have, and in that capacity, you will be sitting in a quasi-adjudicatory stance where you'll be sitting as judges to determine whether or not the appeal has merit. In other words, whether or not their disqualification from the application process was consistent with the city's ordinance or was inconsistent. You're not actually hearing the ordinance, or you're not hearing the appeal tonight, just setting a date.
Understood. Okay.
Right, but if we're going to change the ordinance, I think that's what they're asking. If we're going to be changing things, opening up zones, that's going to change, obviously, part of the application process, correct?
It may at a future time, but I don't anticipate that you're going to have that ordinance in place by the April 8th meeting, at which time we are proposing this appeal be heard. It may moot the appeal if the applicant is willing to stay the appeal until such time as a successor ordinance is adopted. That's certainly an option. But I can't give you a timetable as to when that might occur. It may be 45 days. It may be 6 months. It's very difficult to tell. And keep in mind, you're going to have a new city manager at your next city council meeting who is going to be directing a lot of what the agenda process is and the staff's time. So there may be allocations of time in order to get the budget together that it may, whatever Mr. Gassaway is going to be directing staff, I can't tell you what those priorities will be at this point. So.
Okay, but my concern is the people that are in the application process, are they going to be able to finalize, or I mean, can they finalize their process and get accepted? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, Rick, maybe as city manager, might have some input to add on whether it would be appropriate to try to put this on the next agenda.
I would say, based off of the timing, if we could have an ability to stay the appeal until we can come back with what your previous motion was on the previous item, to readdress the selection process, reprioritize the process, look at another zone, that's going to take some time. And so, as the city attorney says, this would not be able to be accomplished within the next 2 weeks to do all this, because we need to really vent this system.
So would it be appropriate, in your opinion, and reasonable to set the hearing date for the next council meeting? Or do you think that's too much on David Gasaway at this point?
I would think it would be too much for him at this point in time, this late in the game. If council could delay the hearing at least until the, I'd say the 13th, that gives them a month.
13th of April.
The 13th, I was going to say 13th of May.
Oh, May, okay.
Because what tonight is just a day to set the hearing. There is no legal obligation that I'm aware of to have it within the next 15 days or so. So as long as you have it, at a time that's reasonable, that gives us some other time to deal with this.
And we can set the date for a hearing and not actually wind up having a hearing.
Correct.
Yeah, if council ultimately takes action to amend the ordinance that moots the appeal, as the council has mentioned, that's certainly a possibility. So if you set it out, I don't want to say 6 months, that's way too long, but if you set it out a period of time to give staff an opportunity to bring back the recommendations that you've requested, it may address the issues that the appellant is seeking.
That's tough, because, I'm sorry, I just feel bad for the applicant in the appeal, because I mean, it's not their fault that we're going through transition and new city manager, and I sympathize with them, but.
Well, I think they just mentioned that's what they're talking about. They're fine with that. They're
Yeah.
saying if we're going to change things, they're fine with pushing the appeal off.
And the alternative is you set the appeal for the next meeting, you deny the appeal, and you have them go back through the process anew whenever it comes up. You could also waive their application fee when it comes up. You're going to get essentially, I think, to the same place.
I'm sorry, we'll let you speak
I just want to make a proposal regarding staying the appeal. I think we'd be willing to stay the appeal, but perhaps if we could retain the option to add it back onto the calendar if perhaps the delay is longer than expected. But I think for the time being, it makes sense to put the appeal on hold until we can see how this process plays out a little bit. And then perhaps if we give notice to the city that we want to add it back on, we could do that in the future.
Okay, I understand.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry.
The proposal, I think, is a good one. I think ultimately, though, it would be, since the council has the power to set the hearing, the applicant could come, write a letter, say, okay, we're tired of waiting, please put it on the next available meeting. Then the council would set the date at that time. I would not want to recommend to you that the applicant set the date for the hearing, because it may not work for council, it may not work for the agenda. Ultimately, you have the responsibility under the ordinance to set the appeal.
I think we'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that we go ahead and direct the staff to work on the proposal as we discussed in item number 7, and that we stay the appeal until such time they come back to us. It may be a month, it may be 2.
Yeah. I would second that.
And just a quick question before. I'm sorry, I thought I overheard your discussion with Rick about maybe having 2 council members working with. Is there any merit to?
Well, the difficulty is that's not on the agenda on
Oh,
this item, so we
got
can't really talk about it. So what I was saying is we may want to let Mr. Gasaway chime in on setting up some kind of 2-member subcommittee to discuss those changes. Because that was not on the agenda tonight to do that, I would be reluctant to say that's something you should take action on, but we can certainly have that discussion with Mr. Gasaway, and if you'd like to set up a 2-member subcommittee, then you can, we have that opportunity.
Would it be appropriate to give David direction that if he does like that idea, that he just puts that on the next agenda? Or whatever, where he sees it fit?
I think that's appropriate, because you're allowed under the Brown Act to give direction to staff to place something on a future agenda, even if the staff's not here yet. So he would have that option and say, Mr. Gasaway, when you get here, we would like to put this on the next agenda.
Okay. So I would like to suggest, I mean, I like your motion maybe, but would you accept it as modified by by Dave.
I would accept the modification, yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and second. Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Dearness?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yep.
Wade?
Yes.
Mayor Toussaint?
Yes. That passes 5-0.
Can I just ask for a point of
Would that be
clarification?
appropriate, Dave, at this time?
You're running the meeting, it's up to you.
Okay. Yes.
So are we talking about the current applicant continuing to go through the application process and possibly being able to open a dispensary during the time that the appeal is stayed? Because if the city's only allowing for one dispensary, I'm just asking, I mean, is the whole application process being halted, or is that applicant going to be able to move forward while we're waiting for ordinance changes?
I think that's a good question. I just, obviously, if that whole process moves forward before we can even adjust, it kind of negates all these discussions we're even having here tonight.
Well, on item 7, I made it very clear that we're going to continue following the law as it is today until the council tells us to change that law. So we're going to continue processing the application. And I also mentioned on that item that it opens up the city to potential litigation if you stop the process now and the person has made financial commitments in reliance on the existing law. You could have potential litigation from the landlord for intentional interference with contractual relations by passing an ordinance or making changes to stop the application process with that. So there's a whole range of potential liability. I would not recommend that you halt the process. Now, the process may play itself out and the applicant may be qualified, may not be qualified. Ultimately, we don't know that at this point because we're still vetting that process. But I would not recommend, and I did not recommend on item 7, that you stop the process for the current applicant.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll move on to item number 9. Lisa, can we get a title readout?
Item 9, council member reports.
All right. Does anyone have any committees to report out on?
No.
Yes.
Go.
Just very briefly, had a meeting with the North Regional County Agency of Governments. Again, went over transportation, spoke specifically about Highway 135 and the Black Road intersection. Listened to comments from growers because there was suggestion to put a roundabout in that area. That's up in Santa Maria. So that was turned down in favor of a stoplight. Then I met with the Pollution Control Board up in Santa Maria, and they discussed having portable pollution detectors. So they are going to come public with this this process, and right now they're placing them in areas such as around hospitals and schools where there are a lot of population, just to see what kind of pollutants are in the air. So I think that'll be an interesting study when that comes out. So that was the gist of that.
Okay. Anyone else have any committee reports? Okay. I have 2 that one I'd just like to dovetail a little bit on Karen here. I did meet with APCD, their director, Erin, and she kind of gave me a PowerPoint going over several aspects of what APC does and the different pollutants that they're looking after and stuff. So that kind of gave me a little orientation about that board. And the other was we've had this kind of little thread or email following a meeting with SB CAG, some representatives from there, and we were following up. I followed up with you, Rick, about they had suggested us, if we're open into looking into any form of merger with regard to our transit stuff. And so, I mean, I have the email here, but I believe you said that you are supportive of it in some ways, but there are certain jurisdictions that may or may not be in support of it. And I'd just kind of like to get your feedback there to bring a little more clarity, and if it is anything that we should be pursuing, or if there's any merit, no one's interested, or what.
Yes, and Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, in talking to our Public Works Director, the city is interested in having another agency take over the current transit system right now. There have been discussions in the past with the city of Santa Maria, the city of Lompoc, and we would be in favor of possibly discussing with one of those two parties of taking over the transit administration of it. It's very time consuming, and it would make sense to have them work on it. They have a larger staff, and they do regional transit related activities in the valley. And so we are in discussions with them. So.
Oh, so we already are in discussions with
Yes,
regard to that?
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, I meant to bring that. And then, in addition to that, they had a big discussion regarding the Clean Air Express and the possibility of adding another line from the 154 to Buellton, so another route to capture more people in the valley. Because as it is now, it's just here, it's in Solvang.
Got it.
To the 101 in Buellton.
Okay, if there's no one else, we'll move on to item number 10, correspondence received by the City Council. Item 10. Oh, okay. Yeah, so anyway, if there's any items that we've received with regard to correspondence, Rick did remind me that we had a public speaker earlier about Cowboy Bob's request. So I don't know if whoever's the most familiar with that one, if there's anything you want to address or if they need to be added onto the agenda.
It's on page 193 of your agenda packet is what he was referring to.
How do you say no to a guy named Cowboy Bob?
Proposal, okay. Yeah, actually, yes, Jim, yeah.
I think Cowboy Bob is a good idea. I don't like Cowboy Bob as a name, but the idea is, I think, appropriate for the city. As a matter of fact, Brooks Firestone came to me and asked me about, could we start something like that? Because it would be a draw for the city. And as far as location where Cowboy Bob wants to put his things, I think if there's any way that he could put it at the corner of Alisal and Mission in that vacant lot, it would be an ideal spot for him to show off his horses and his carriage and his picture-taking kind of thing. So I think that might be a great idea.
Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok did this quite a bit back in the 1800s.
I honestly think it makes much more sense to do in San Ynez, personally. I don't know that it fits in Solvang. That's just my opinion.
And I just want to point out, this is just council communication. If you'd like to discuss it more substantively, take public comment on it, you can direct staff to
And I'm
put it
sorry,
on a
I'm just
future
trying to look
agenda.
at what it is really that they're looking for. Are they looking to be put on the agenda for a presentation? Or?
Yes, he was asking to be placed on a future agenda, and that's what I was trying to bring to your attention, is to see if there's a consensus on council that you'd like to have this placed on a future agenda for discussionary
So with that, do we have the
purpose.
nods to put this on the future
Yes.
agenda? Okay. Looks like you have at least 3 nods.
Okay.
Or nods.
Okay.
Okay.
Do it on a real light night.
Is there any other correspondence that anyone would like to address? With that, we'll move on to council comments and request, item number 11. Danny, would you like to start?
We discussed, I don't know, in a previous meeting about possibly combining with ID1, the water and all that, and then we don't seem to talk about it ever again. So I'm just wondering if that's something we want to pursue, if something we want to put on the agenda, is it something that we should talk about?
So, so with regard to that, actually, I did mean to make mention of that earlier. But one of the things that might be beneficial to us is at some point in the future, during maybe the member reports on these different committees, I don't know if maybe we need to spend a little extra time and just kind of develop a consensus in the council about, each one of these committees or committee ad hoc, it's 2 council members, and we really probably should give them goals of what we want them to be accomplishing on these committees or ad hocs to make sure that whatever they're coming back, with or working on is consistent with the council's goals. Would that make sense?
Makes sense.
But also ad hoc means as needed, and it has to do with that organization.
Yeah, so you just take things, like even if it's a ad hoc around water, then we would discuss those goals that we want to pursue, or if it's with, saying a CSD, we discuss the goals that we want that committee or the ad hoc to pursue with that agency. So with that, would it be appropriate just at the next meeting, we spend a little extra time during the council member reports to discuss this, or, okay.
We can put that down as an agenda item, and that would be good with the new city manager coming on board, so he has an idea as to what the direction is for council on the various subcommittees.
Perfect.
Okay.
So maybe we can get a staff report on each one of these items, things that the prior council used to be pursuing, and recommendations from staff on each one of these. And that would also afford each council member here the opportunity to weigh in on any other ideas or goals. And we can develop that consensus here to make sure that we're all moving in the right direction. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. The only other thing I would say is to have an ad hoc committee for economic development. I think we should have
So
one.
we could discuss that at that.
That is scheduled for the next meeting.
Great.
Yeah,
As,
okay.
as an action item.
Okay, perfect.
I would like to.
I'm sorry, Chris, Robert, you're next. You're done? Okay.
All I want to say, though, my only comments are, I wish I had a larger audience, Rick, to acknowledge what you've done for the past, since December 10th, since we came on board, and the assistance you've given me personally, and I really, really, really appreciate your demeanor and your not I guess methodicalness, but just you've been a real asset to me, and you've really helped me out a lot, and I've really, really enjoyed working with you, and I really appreciate what you've done for me. So I want to say this is your last meeting, so I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you, Robert. My sentiments exactly.
You're a good guy, Rick.
Yep. So thank you so much for your service and your help and your assistance with me as a councilwoman. Really appreciate it, and wish you all of the best. So thank you very much.
Chris?
I'll just echo those sentiments. No need to belabor them, but thank you so very much for your stepping in at a very difficult time and in difficult circumstances and putting up with me. I do have a lot of questions, and I know that I can be impatient. It's probably a delicate word. One of the things I'd like to ask the council to consider is special meetings or workshops on certain subjects so that we can have a better understanding of some of these topics. For example, with respect to cannabis, I know there are a lot of professionals that spend a lot of time helping the councils around the state to understand what can be done or what should be done, what's coming down the pipeline, things to consider. Another example would be we've discussed this idea of consolidating water and wastewater agencies, and that, I think, is a topic that's going to take more than just 15 or 20 minutes in a regular session meeting. So I would suggest to the council that we look to a special meeting, an open public session, a workshop, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I mean, I know ID1 is undergoing some significant changes right now, so we might want to have the ad hoc meet with ID1 before we do
That actually, we have put that forward, but unfortunately we haven't heard back from them.
Right, because
Yes,
they wanted
Councilmember
to.
Dearness, I have contacted ID1 and reached out to Chris Dahlstrom for a date for the ad hoc committee to meet, and I haven't heard back. I will continue to
Great.
try and get contact with them.
I also have heard from members of ID1, but they are still looking for us to change our ad hoc committee.
Okay. So we could bring that up again during council member reports at the next meeting, or perhaps during the more in-depth agenda goals. Yeah. So aside from that, I'd like to echo a lot of the same sentiments regarding Rick. It's been a pleasure working with you, and you know, I really liked the way that you gave a lot of feedback around the state of the city. I know there's a lot to be thrown into. You know, me coming in fresh mayor, and all of a sudden, boom, you're right there, state of the city, and you kind of redesigned that whole process, and I've received a lot of compliments around that. So, but also with regard to that, I also understand your feeling of drinking from a fire hose, and I'm sure that David Gassaway will share that same thing, and it will take a little bit of time for the council to, it takes a little bit of time just for anyone up here to start becoming effective, and when you do have a new council, it will take a little bit of time for everyone to get up to speed. So, everyone has to have a little bit of patience, and I appreciate yours through this process. That's it for my comments. Before I forget, key thing that Dave mentioned earlier was regarding the appeals process. That is a quasi-judicial hearing. With that, one of the things that I have noticed is that on our planning commission meetings, we do have a section in there for ex parte communications, and I think that it's great that it's there because it reminds people to disclose any of those ex parte communications. I also understand that the planning commission, has more hearings that involve those types of scenarios, so it's maybe more appropriate that it's just on every single agenda. But I do think it would be very appropriate for us to reevaluate somewhere in our policies, just that when we get a staff report, if each agenda item somehow would fall underneath any of those categories, it's just simply marked that way as a reminder for the council members to disclose any ex parte communications. So I don't know where that would be appropriate. I'm looking for your direction on it. I know we have the council policies that are going to be coming up pretty soon. Maybe it's appropriate during that. There's a great documentation from the League of California Cities. It's about 18 pages. It might be worthwhile to share that with all the council members so they can kind of understand, but even reading it, it's very confusing. So just a little thing to abreast everyone on that issue, and maybe find a way that we can get it in the staff reports so that it's just always there. Just even look at this meeting tonight. There's so much going on. It's so easy to, forget things like that and even know what qualifies as that type of an item. So, and it's probably less than 5% of our agendas that even have that, but I think it would be nice if it was there,
I agree, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, Ryan, because I have absolutely been feeling that there have been many meetings ex parte that I have been unaware of. And so this also comes on the heels of my suggesting to have the council member retreat where we can go over communications, appropriate communications, and decorum on the dais. And I think that'll be a good thing for David Gassaway to be involved in. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I believe on the previous meeting, we all had the nods for that. We all agree this would be a good, productive thing. This is just another area where somewhere, if it's during the council, if it's the policies or wherever you feel best, I'd like to get the nods to bring that up and discuss, how we get that done.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we currently have down tentatively scheduled April the 22nd, your council meeting April the 22nd, to review and update the council protocols. So, we can have it on the 22nd. We can shift it to May 13th. I think that would be a call for Mr. Gassaway when he gets on board to see how comfortable he is to discuss that with council.
And is the council policies the right place to put this? Because what I'm really asking for is more on staff to put that in the agenda. It's not really I don't know if it's really a council protocol at that point, but Dave would be the best to answer that.
Well, I think you just give staff direction to put it on those agenda items that staff believes to be quasi-adjudicative in nature, and we'll just deal with it that way. It's on the Planning Commission agenda. There was no formal action by the Planning Commission to impose that on itself. I don't think you really need to put it in your council protocols other than requiring upon yourself to go ahead and disclose those. Other bodies have those requirements. Some of them are statutory. I know the Coastal Commission has it baked into statute that they're required to, but you could certainly put it in your protocols. But we'll go ahead and put it on the agendas where we believe that it's a quasi-adjudicative.
But for the time being, direction is enough to have staff begin putting that.
And you'll
we just
see
need
it.
Nods?
You'll see it on the April 8th I'm sorry. Whenever that appeal comes back, that was number 8 on the agenda, you'll see that as a quasi-adjudicative, and we can put that on the agenda by just direction to staff.
So do we just need nods for that direction right now? All right, you got my nod. Looks like I have everyone's nod. Chris? Yes or no? All right. With that, we're gonna adjourn. Thank you.
you.